All right, looks like we are streaming live, and the Crimis are here right on time. Let's bring them on. As we are patiently waiting for their arrival, here they are. They're in the holodeck.
Yeah. All right. Well, half of us are here.
I'm still primping.
We're live, so you're primping in front of millions of people.
Don't leave a letter out.
So, how are you guys?
Well, all right. All right.
Good.
We had a nice
1 minute.
1 minute.
Okay, well, we're live right now. So
Okay. Well,
this
we
is
had
this
a-
is like
we had a
this is
nice-
this is like when Holger Shukai just hit record
right.
when David Sylvian showed up in the studio.
Right. And it turned out to be Flux and Premonition.
That's right.
It's a great CD. One of the best ambient CDs of all time.
David had no idea that they were recording. It was like, well done. I think Holger passed away, didn't he?
I believe so. I believe so.
He was
Yeah.
he was such a great spirit, man.
Well, we had a really for us, we had a nice visit of old fans of your show, Diane and Ivor Francis and Diane Cantwell, who long ago came up to visit us when we had the B&B going, stopped here. We became fast friends, and we spent 3 days basically talking and eating in that order, and just taking a lot of food and hanging out in the Persian tea room till wee hours. And it was very uplifting for us. They're really good playmates. And they gifted me a thought form healing session for my birthday, which was really nice. And that's what they do is this modality that really came to them from the spirit realms. And that's a whole story that it's too long to get into here, but what they do is find thought forms either from this life or previous lives, and thought forms are kind of crystallizations of karma or trauma, and they end up taking almost like a sentience within our field, and they have come up a way with removing them. And I think it's thoughtformhealing.com is their site.
Mm-hmm.
But I had 3 releases that were really very good, 2 from a past life, 1 from this one. And I thought they were really helpful.
Cool.
So,
Well, good. Did you have a good release, Chris?
Release? Well, I just had to put myself together. So it wasn't a release. It was a coming together.
yeah, she didn't have a session.
Oh, I didn't have one. I thought you were just talking about what I was doing. No, they
He was
just
talking
worked
about his
on
releases.
Steve. Yeah, they worked on Steve, which was really very kind of them. Yeah, very good. I've had it in the past with them, and it was quite interesting.
Okay, cool. Interesting,
Yeah.
good, interesting.
Yeah, yeah.
So, Steve, how do you feel that you've left that past life baggage behind now?
Right. Well, I feel just a tiny bit lighter.
Right?
One of them was it actually takes a form, and the one of them was a dagger in the heart from a betrayal from
With a
some
spring
time.
dagger with a spring that's
Right.
like
Right.
keeps
And
bouncing back.
so so he picks up on the particular life, and then the coalition of this negative karmic assemblage takes a form. And so this one took the form of dagger in the heart, and I just felt my heart get lighter. I've actually just kind of weird. I've always felt like there's a clamp on my heart, throughout my whole life. So,
Interesting.
so this will hopefully help, but I feel much better.
Good.
So, and you, and how's your mouth?
Fascinating. What's that?
How's your mouth?
You had work done?
Mm-hmm. That's fine.
You okay? All right.
Yeah, great.
Sometimes it takes a while to recover from that.
Have you had a session with Diane and Ivor ever?
No. Mm-mm. No, I've resolved all my past life issues.
That's
Oh.
good. Okay.
Well,
Yeah.
maybe you can help
know,
everybody
we're-
else then.
I'm clear of my past lives.
Oh,
Yeah, it's
wow.
gone-
That's why we hang around you,
Yeah,
Robert.
go-
They're in the
You
they're in the
flow-
past now.
flow.
Going clear. I can hardly see. You've gone so clear.
Yeah. Well,
That's
You
why
know,
he pixelates.
I've had these things every now and then that do happen. They've happened in the past. The big thing was not the heart, but like somebody stabbing me in the back.
I
I had that,
Mm-hmm.
and I remember and there were two times specifically where it was really coming up. One was it would come up every now and then, right? But there was this one time where I had been dating this woman in California who I had said I would not date before. Like I'd been involved with her and I kind of like said, okay, I'm good. I don't need to do this anymore. But she came back and we generally had a really good time together. You know, we could talk, we could hang out, we could play around. So she was a fun companion. But she also had a weird side business, right? So I'm not going to mention her name, but her weird side business is she was a sex worker, and she did the old happy ending for people who went to a very high. It was a weird place. It was this place in Berkeley. I've actually mentioned this place before, and some people know about this place. And it was right across from Pete's Coffee, and it looked like just a regular house in northern Berkeley. And all those houses are pretty like craftsmen. They're like high style craftsman homes with upgrades, and they looked just like that. It was right around the corner from a bookstore, Steve, that you probably would have liked. And it didn't stand out, but that's where these things would happen. And I knew that that's what she did, right? Like, she was putting herself through school, and it was, I was going to use the word, it beats waiting on tables, but it pays more money than waiting on tables. So it was always a little weird. Like every now and then we'd be out and like, there'd be some guy that probably might've been a client. That was a little strange, like
awkward.
Yeah, but it was like I really didn't care all that much because I wasn't really sure that I was in love with her or anything. She's like a cool person to hang out with, but there was some kind of emotional investment, even though it's not like you and I are going to get married. And she at that time had been kind of having this long distance affair with this guy who was in England, but normally lived in the Bay Area. He was away doing photography in England for a while. And then he came back. So we were hanging out in his absence. So one day, I think we were having, might have been Chinese food, I think. We sat down and we sat at the table. I'm like, man, it feels like somebody stabbing me in the back.
Interesting.
I said, usually that's like a sign that I'm going to be betrayed or something. I'm feeling this backstabbing pain right now. And you should have seen the look on her face. She was like, and then it was about like 5 minutes later, she tells me that this guy is back from England and, she wants to start seeing him again. And I was like, okay, you're on your own. So I just got up and walked out. Like I didn't feel the need to talk to her or anything. Like, we're not going to negotiate. We're just done.
Yeah.
And she was shocked. Like, I couldn't believe you just walked out. I'm like, well, people do that. People just get up and walk away sometimes. So I did that. And then it got very weird. It started to get very strange. Do you want to hear the rest of the story?
It sounds like we do.
Yeah, if it's not weird yet, then let's get
sounds
to the
like
weird
there's
part.
more.
Oh, it gets much weirder. Okay. So there's all these weird layers to this thing. Okay. So she's shocked that I had done that. And at that time, I think I told this story before, a variation of it before. I'm not sure if I told the whole thing, but at that time I was in this play in Berkeley, and it was a Shakespeare. And I played like the friar or the priest or something. I was not very good. But it was in the basement of this pizza restaurant, and they had a theater down there, and they would do plays down there, right? So prior to this walk out the door moment at the restaurant, she had come to see me at the play. This is when we were, I guess, okay. And then after the play, we sat down at a table outside. I think we might have had a slice of pizza or something. And there was this woman who was in the play, and she was interested in me, right? And then she had some kind of conversation with her friend. Her friend had told her that I was at the table with this woman who I'd walked out the door from, right? So getting a little entangled here.
In the future. Yeah.
So I'd given her a couple of things to listen to. And I think it was on a Saturday night, right? It was a Saturday night. We had a performance on this Saturday night. But the Friday before that Saturday night, I was at this woman's house whom I had the knife in the back moment with. That had not happened yet, by the way. That was still in the future.
Mm-hmm.
And it was in Oakland, near Berkeley on College Avenue. And it was a very beautiful night. I was walking my dog, and I saw a UFO. And it was a silver orb. It was not a plane. Didn't move like a plane. I'm like, wow, that's a freaking UFO. So I went back to Backstabber's house, and I said, hey, I just saw a UFO. And she didn't know what to think of it. It's like, oh, there's Crazy Robert or whatever. But I was convinced that that's what I had seen. So that was on a Friday night. Saturday night, we have a performance at this pizza place. And this woman who's an actress, by the way, she's done films, like she's done some amateur films, not like, ex-amateur films, but amateur films. She's on the internet. Anyway, so she comes up to me before the play starts, and she hands me the music, and she's got a bit of an attitude because apparently she was able to find out that I was involved with Backstabber. And she hands me the music, and there was this other woman who was in the play. She was standing kind of next to me, and her name was Amy. I said, hey, Amy, I saw a UFO last night. And the woman who handed me the CDs stopped in her tracks, spun around, and said, what did you say? I said, I saw a UFO last night. What did it look like? And so I told her, I said, well, it was like this silver orb, and it moved very unusually across the sky. She said, I saw the same thing. I was crossing the Golden Gate Bridge, and I saw the same thing.
Interesting.
And I'm like, wow, what do you know? So the UFO kind of brought us like into orbit. It was a very interesting moment, right? So I have the UFO moment with her. Now all of a sudden she's over whatever. And by the way, I got to know her, and she was not a believer in UFOs. That was not her thing.
Good.
She had some other interesting beliefs, but that was not one of them.
And it shook her.
It shook her, but it shook her that I saw the same thing.
There was validation, yeah.
Right. Couldn't blow it off.
So it was, I think, a few days later, maybe the following week, where the backstabbing moment happened. Right. It was a backstabbing moment. I think it was in September. Mm-hmm. In fact, I know the day exactly. Well, it was, I think, the day after, I think it might've been the day or two after. The day was 9/9/99. So September 9th, 1999. And I went to go interview for this gig at eMusic, which I eventually got. And I think I went to go see the actress, went to her place in the city that night. And that was kind of supernatural. It was wild. It was storming and lightning, which rarely happens in San Francisco. I swear to God, it was like a scene in a movie where like somebody's inside their house, but like the wind is blowing through their hair. It was really weird. Very, very weird. It was like, okay,
Curious.
something unusual is going on here right now.
Some kind of a nodal point.
Yeah. And so, one thing leads to another, and thunder and lightning. Right. So I think it was a day or two. I think it was the next day. Right? The backstabber came to see me. And basically I told her what happened. I'm like, well, you're kind of out of the picture now. So, but then it got really weird too. It got even more weird because now that I was out of the picture, she wanted me more, of course. Right. But her dude was back in town, and of course she's kind of, really loving this dude.
Mm-hmm.
And I eventually wound up meeting him one night, and it was around Christmas time in the Bay Area. And so it was one of these, we used to have these big parties called the Anon Salon. They weren't big. They were kind of smallish parties, but they were always connected to Burning Man. There was kind of a Burning Man Discordian group. So I'd go to these, and he was there. And the reason I knew he was there, life is just so fucking weird sometimes, is because I'd met this woman in New York City. She was, I think, South African, and she was a filmmaker, and she eventually wound up moving to the Bay Area, and she stayed in touch with me because I'd met her in New York. And she knew this guy. She knew the photographer who had been the lover of the backstabber. So she invited me.
Photographer. Okay.
She invited me to come out and hang out with him that night. So he was actually a pretty cool guy. And, we got to exchange stories, and it was very interesting. I miss shit like that. My life used to be so much more interesting.
That is kind of like, and it's almost like a template for your stories, or all these sort of intertwines,
right?
That happen to you.
It's like Seinfeld on acid or something. It's really, it's like a Californian strange attraction version of Seinfeld.
Right. Well, that's food for the memoir that is
it is
oozing out of you at some point.
I've left out some salient details in that story.
Well, you have to be like Bob Woodward. You have to leave out the good stuff for the for the book.
Right, exactly. So welcome back to the show. If people are just tuning in now, we're actually going to be doing something here.
We may have
Wait a minute. I thought this was going to be on Tavistock. Well, maybe there was a connection to Tavistock.
Maybe Tavistock was behind it all.
Maybe it was Tavistock.
Maybe Tavistock programmed all of us, like The Prisoner.
So let's weave it in.
Yeah.
So these are the Crimis, and they are here on this channel on the first Friday of every month, except for last Friday, because we moved them up to this Friday. And it's always a pleasure to have them here. We have Steve and Chris being the lovely one with the glasses.
Lovely one. Mm-hmm. This is the lovely one.
And the red, and Steve being the rugged one with the glasses and the blue.
One.
Who used to be a ginger.
Right.
I've seen your young pictures. That's true.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, that's true.
And there's not a lot of Sicilian redheads.
He was a redhead when I met him.
So, that calls, well,
the Khazarians. I got into the Khazarians with Danny a couple of days ago.
Yeah, we should go back and listen.
No, it's not. The Khazarians, some of them were redheaded.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
They had finished DNA, some of them.
Well, the redhead, the redhead thing, and you've got the mummies, the
mummies in China. God, the Chinese never want to talk about that.
No, red beards
and tartan cloth
and wearing tartan, and I think it was they somehow one day got up from Austria and made their way. Yeah, that's where they're from originally, pretty sure. And made their way to the to the edge of the Gobi Desert there, and had some sort of community. Who knows? There's something called them, and they're, I don't know what they are. They're like 5,000-6,000 BC, maybe something like that.
Something like that, but they seem to be older than the Chinese culture that they predate.
Well, the Chinese,
really?
yeah,
They
well,
predate
the Chinese have
Chinese
been
pretty
doing propaganda longer than Tavistock.
That's a really good point.
Yeah.
Did they find a really interesting timepiece in there too?
Oh, don't know.
I think they found a timepiece.
In
that
the
looked-
They
Tarim
might have,
Basin?
they, I don't know, if with the mummies, they may have, I
yes,
don't remember what else was in there.
looked very contemporary.
Yeah, I remember they went on tour a
Sure,
number
why
of years
not?
ago, maybe
Yeah.
about 10, 15 years ago.
The Mummies
The
did?
Mummies, yeah,
The
they had a
mum-
whole
the Mummies.
band,
Yeah, with the Mummies.
they had, they played played pre-rock.
Right. Did Tutankhamun open for him?
Right. Yes, they did the
Oh,
Tutankhamun,
Walk Like an
Walk Like an
Egyptian?
Tutankhamun and the Redhead Mummies. Now that's a
Mm-hmm.
band.
Why not?
So yeah, well, there's a boatload of mystery surrounding that, and just really, really interesting. But one of the things that comes out of that really is the one of the Tavistockian propaganda pieces that moves out of Darwinism, which they supported, is this idea, the myth of progress, right? And that we're which comes out of Darwinism really, because we're monkeys, and we moved up, and because that whatever iteration we are now is far superior than anything we've been in the past. So that's a whole interesting thing. So one of the aspect of that is that people in the ancient world didn't travel. That the average person, yes, maybe you can say that about medieval times. People didn't go 20 miles out of their village, but in the ancient world, there's just so much evidence that people went thousands and thousands
Oh,
of miles.
yeah, God. I mean,
Yeah.
all over the place.
Egyptians in Ireland.
Including, yes, Egyptians in Ireland, continent to continent.
You have the redheaded people showing up in New Zealand pre-Maori. They were there before
Pre-Maori.
pre-Maori.
Really?
The Maoris come from Easter Island, and they have a whole migration story from absolutely.
Right. And the Olmecs, have those bearded heads, right? It's like some
Yeah,
of
the Olmecs look like Forrest Whitaker.
Yes, yeah, right. And there's all, it looks like, a Matrix movie with the mixed races all over the place, really.
There's a lot, there's a great deal that we don't know about. Absolutely. And we're going to be talking about Tavistock. And for people who are not aware of Tavistock, it is located in London and has been kind of evolving since around World War I, World War II, with a number of different characters that have been inserted in there to essentially forge social narratives, right? The narratives that drive the herds. It all seems to start and emanate from Tavistock.
Yeah, so their first tasks seem to be to get people interested in fighting World War I.
Absolutely. They needed that war. Yep.
Right. And so that was their first propaganda. And what we found, it came out, one of the things that came out of was called the War Propaganda Bureau.
Mm-hmm.
And that was operated out of what's called Wellington House.
Wellington House. Yep.
Right. And so so this was how it got started, and they do it through all the wars. But how do you get people to fight? And World War I was as horrific as any war, really. Just a total.
Especially with the mustard gas.
But yeah, with the gases and the trenches and the mud and what have you.
Mud. Oh my God. And like the Battle of Verdun, it just went on for months and months and months, and thousands of people slaughtered.
Oh, unbelievable. I mean, I don't know the exact totals, but and the idea was that plus they had to get us interested in fighting on their side, and it was really the same thing in World War II, and that's one of their Britain's great tricks is to get us to follow in their follies.
Mm-hmm.
It seems like with World War I, there's this interesting interface between Theodore Herzl and the English and Tavistock, because Herzl, who's the head of the Zionist Congress, basically wants mandate Israel and says, look, because this is after they were winding the war down, right? I mean, it's winding down and coming to some kind of conclusion, an armistice. And then Herzl comes in and says, look, to the English, you can win this war. You just have to bring the Americans in. And if you bring the Americans in and win the war, then you can thank us later. And what happens is that, yes, indeed, that takes place, although the Americans come in very late. And the war ends. And so we have the Treaty of Versailles. Mm-hmm. And then the Treaty of Versailles is one of the great travesties of all time.
Right. And who presided over that from our side? The Dulles brothers. Working for Sullivan and Cromwell.
Yeah. And then we have Woodrow Wilson showing up like a stiff. And what happens, and you guys are way familiar with this, is that we come to the end of the Ottoman Empire at that time. And now all of a sudden it's Turkey. And there are territories that are ceded to the English as a result of redrawing all these borders in World War I. And one of those territories winds up becoming Palestine. So this is the part of the end game. And then Palestine is then given to the Zionist Congress and says, here you go. Here's your place for the right of return. And you can go start your nation state of Israel over here in Palestine. Except a lot of the German Jews did not want to go.
Oh, exactly. And didn't. So much so that when they first had the congresses in Berlin, I believe, before World War II, of the Zionists to start promulgating for the homeland, and it was so unpopular they had to move them to Zurich, move the congresses to Zurich because the Jews didn't want to go.
Why would they? They're doing great, right?
Oh, they were. And even if they were insular and whatever, they had their thing. And who would want to?
Well, go ahead. But I was going to say the other thing on a personal note is one of our authors, Ayana Sazak Blatt, who you interviewed at one point, and you interviewed her husband. Her father's family, after the war, they were Polish Jews. And after the war, they went to Israel and they were miserable.
I hated it.
They were not welcomed in. And then they ended up going to Canada subsequently, and then New York City
via marriage, they were able to get into
Columbia.
Canada.
Then he went to Columbia University and was educated there. But they were not happy at all when they went to Israel after the war.
It was just a big plot of sand, pretty much,
exactly.
Right?
Yeah, until they ended up developing the drip irrigation.
Right.
They were the ones who really brought drip irrigation to the fore in agriculture.
Yeah, they didn't want to go. It's like, no, we're doing great here. We got these department stores, and we're furriers, and we're haberdashers, and we've got the few businesses. Why should we go?
Networks.
Well, that was and that's one of the theories of the of the Zionist involvement with the Holocaust.
That's right. Let's make it so horrible, so you want to leave, and we can increase our ranks over here. So Tavistock they start off there, and they sell World War I. They wind up selling World War II as well. Where in the Tavistock evolution is that? Are they becoming specifically because they had a different name earlier?
Wellington House is what they started out as.
Right. Well, it what happens is then they're all hooked in through this character named Kurt Lewin.
We're going to get into Kurt Lewin in a big way.
Okay, good. Well, then you can bring that stuff whenever you want.
Edward VII is the guy in England who is the catalyst behind starting the Tavistock Institute.
Right. So Kurt Lewin crosses the borders between the United States, the Tavistock United States, and the OSS, morphing into the CIA in 1947. So he's involved on both sides of the pond, so that the CIA, you can look at it as an arm of Tavistock, however you want to, it's all really different arms of the same squid.
It's like a hydra, right?
Yeah, same squid.
Yes.
It's like a hydra.
Good image.
So so this person, Kurt Lewin, is sort of like the crossover point between MK Ultra. So he's very much involved in the founding of MK Ultra.
Now, isn't Kurt Lewin he has ties also to the Frankfurt group too, right?
Frankfurt School.
Yes,
Frankfurt School.
and I forget exactly where, but again, that's another, the old Zem diagrams where there's so much
Yes,
crossover.
exactly. Yeah.
So the Frankfurt School is just another arm of the same, propaganda, but it's the Marxism side of the arm.
And
Is the Frankfurt School. And as I think we've talked about a bunch of times before, really what we're seeing right now is the fusion of fascism and Marxism in this country. And it's playing out in
right. It's
ways.
it's the corporate synthesis of the kind of neo-Marxist ideology that is being flexed around the planet. The reason why I'm talking about Tavistock, and you had your company this week, we talked a little bit about it yesterday, was due to the fact that I had a very strong hit that Tavistock was involved in what we call the trans agenda.
Yeah, that was a good insight.
And sure enough, it was, right on the money.
Got their fingerprints all over it.
Did you look at that case, the Kira Bell case that I
We did,
about?
and we
watched
went
it
back.
last
We
night.
went back and we watched the shows, and just gave
Just
it a
to
once
catch up
over
a little
because
bit.
What would our show be like if we had a lot of preparation? So we
It'd be like my show.
so we look
That's
like
right.
yes, right. So anyway, so we looked that up, and there are so much of the general Tavistock program maps onto this from the beginning. Especially one of the things that they promote is infantilism, along with veganism and gender transition and feminism, scientism.
Where did you pick up on that? At what point did they say, okay, we're going to invest in infantilism?
Right. Well, it's infantilism, but it's part and parcel of a huge broad program, right? Of dumbing down and all that. And again, keeping people stupid.
I think it's
jump in, please.
I think it's insidious, and that it's not overt. I remember back in the 90s when we were still living in Massapequa on Long Island. I was driving to work one day, and it was like a development that was, built in the maybe 50s or 60s. And I'm driving past this house, and I'm looking, it's Easter time, and they've got all their little Easter decorations up in the window, but they're all these really like Hallmark infantile. Everybody's seen them. It's like a cardboard cutout of a bunny, but it's not a beautiful Easter, Easter mythological bunny. It's a Hallmark stupid infantile cartoon bunny.
It's kind of tacky and cartoony.
Tacky, right? Ticky tacky. So that was my first like conscious awareness of this promulgation of infantilism. I'm thinking to myself at the time, why would an adult subject their children to this low grade art? Why, if you wanted to promote Easter, why wouldn't you promote the beautiful art that is available from other centuries? But this Hallmark crap that it's a low vibration art. So that was my first, before I knew anything about anything, I had this direct experience of that's intentional. There's something going on, and it's a movement, it's a current that runs through our society. And, everybody just accepted it, didn't question it. And it can come in, as we were listening to an interview with Michael Hoffman. And he was saying that after John Kennedy was killed, he said, if you look before and after at the American population, just visually, if you look at the clothing that they were wearing before John Kennedy was murdered all the cloth was cotton, and the hues were very soft, and not necessarily pastels, but they weren't like these electric limeade, horrific bad trip colors. And then after the Kennedy assassination, in comes polyester and bright, really sickening, sweet, horrible colors. And it's like the American people, the thing when I was reading his book, the sentence that really came through to me was, he said, something died in the American people when Kennedy was murdered.
Absolutely.
That sentence, it was so plain and simple, and it just glowed in its truth. And it really entered into me with an understanding of how deeply the American people were affected. So the infantilism to me is a part of that. It wasn't like, oh, we're doing this, program of infantilism. Maybe in their back rooms they said it, but it seeped in like poison into the water.
Right. So, okay, now you're getting into the connection with Tavistock around the death of Kennedy and then what happens afterwards. Because, of course, the band that captures the zeitgeist of Tavistock is the Beatles.
Yeah.
And I have, they are a Tavistockian creation. And let me play this really quickly because I think I can. This, and Chris, this gets right into your infantilism piece. And it's right here. I was thinking of it, and it's She Loves You, right?
Okay.
There, right? She loves you, yeah. She loves you, yeah. Trance-inducing, and then in a lot of ways infantile, right?
Yes.
There's infantilism.
Yes.
And the Beatles are they're an important player in this whole thing with Tavistock and the creation, and it goes into youth, right? There's a reason why I have these kids behind me, because to me they represent kind of wild and untamed youth from the 1970s.
All right. So, and also just correct me if I'm wrong, didn't the Rolling Stones do Sullivan before the Beatles? Right? The Rolling Stones paved the way.
Sullivan?
Ed Sullivan show.
The Beatles were on Sullivan in 64, right?
Right. January, it was like 6 weeks after Kennedy shot.
So the interesting thing about that is that the Beatles released, was it Please Please Me?
Yeah, I'm just up there. Yeah, Please Please Me, which is also very.
They released Please Please Me, if I'm not mistaken, on 11/22/63 in Canada. So the same day that Kennedy dies in North America, they released that record.
Oh.
Yeah.
And another thing to note is repetition. So that's a very fundamental MK Ultra tool, is the repetition. Well, what did he call it? Psychic driving. Who was the guy?
Cameron.
Ewan Cameron up in McGill University in Canada. Psychic driving. And they would, as people were sleeping, they would play these musical themes over and over and over.
Right. I read a quote from Aldous Huxley yesterday where he talks about that. And he talks about, creating the frenzy of the tribal beat and being able to whip up the masses.
So to induce a trance.
Well, this one, yes, I think, and maybe soon Huxley's going to be. I think Huxley's going to be a show for us, maybe, because of his connections. Also, you've got the odd thing of Huxley, and C.S. Lewis dying on the day that Kennedy was killed.
That's right. I remember Huxley died then. I forgot about Lewis.
And C.S. Lewis also, and of course, and Huxley's grandfather, right, was the person who brought Darwin and Darwinism, and he was, and Huxley's grandfather was somewhere in the MI6, MI5 range, something like that.
And
but yeah, so that I think that's a whole other thing. And then Cynthia Chung, who's married to Matt Ehret, and they're this Canadian couple, and they're kind of the darlings in a lot of ways right now. But they do some incredible historical research, and she's done a whole bunch of stuff on Huxley. And I think that may make a nice show because of the whole connection. But it ties back into this with Darwinism again, which is the basis for the theory of progress, right? And Darwinism, and there is no history, right, that we have to be aware of. It's just Darwinism, of course, gives the scientific basis for Marxism.
Yeah,
and if you scroll back down, I guess, on that page where you are, just the next paragraph, where did the term British invasion, it's like, they have this way of putting something up in our face to mock us. Here's the British invasion, the musical invasion, but it's really masking that they have invaded this country. They invaded it from the beginning and they never left. Mm-hmm. But they put it out there, and they have this sick way of mocking the Goyim and looking down on us like we're monkeys.
Twilight language.
British
invasion is twilight language.
Yeah.
So what's interesting about the Beatles are their releases and their key dates. February 11th, 1963, they recorded 10 songs in a single studio session, Please Please Me. So that is what? That's Aquarian, right? Mm. They begin their voyage through Aquarius, 2/11. Okay. Then a year later, they're in the United States, and they wind up going on to the Ed Sullivan Show in February, Aquarius, 1964.
I remember watching it.
I do too. My parents brought me into the room to watch. I was not happy. It was like, I'm doing something. Why do you want me to watch this shit?
Interesting. How old were you? 11?
I was 4.
Oh, you were 4.
I was 4. I remember. Oh,
wow.
I was Bobby then. Bobby, here's the Beatles. I'm like, okay, let me see what they're. What's up?
I got some.
Okay.
I'm not into them. But the Aquarian thing is big, right? February 7th, 1964, they departed from Heathrow, and estimated 4,000 fans screaming and waving. And apparently, I had Hans Uter on the show a couple months ago, and it was a great show. And he I'm not sure if he has the records for it, but he is proof positive that most of those people at the airport were paid for.
Mm-hmm. Really?
Right? Yeah, yes. You've heard that, and I don't know if it was watching him, but I've heard it a couple of places.
That the hype was manufactured.
Right. So that's the Tavistock money, right? Is going.
Yes, absolutely.
Now, how much they were involved in the writing of the songs is hard to say. I mean, I don't. They were in Hamburg. And actually, if you listen to, if there are a couple of clips, where you listen to them, and they were actually an incredible live band. You never really got to see it, but they just, their dynamics and everything, they really knew what they were doing, because they were apparently, playing these Hamburg clubs, 3-4 sets a day, in between whatever strippers, or I don't know exactly what was going on. But the fact is, they actually could play, and they knew what they were doing. How much and where, the songs got influenced, it's possible to say, but because, we're just listening to this sort of repetition and this sort of trance-inducing thing that came through the music,
One of the theories is that one of the members of Tavistock, Theo Adorno, is the lyricist for a lot of the Beatles stuff. I don't know where Adorno starts or stops in that process. He has denied it. Like he was around, he denied it. I had nothing. Of course, he's going to do it.
With it.
And well, and it comes out of John Coleman. Mm-hmm. Coleman, right? And his work on Tavistock. And he was a musical theorist, and he wrote atonal music. And the Beatles' music is decidedly opposite of that. And you've got Paul, who's basically, or whatever's writing Paul, is really influenced by people like Cole Porter, things like that. He's got that show tune aspect to it. So, I don't see Adorno being
That lighthearted.
involved. Yeah, I wouldn't think he's capable, especially, like I said, as a person who's writing atonal music. But it doesn't matter really, whether the Beatles were co-opted and guided, and I think a certain amount of it must have obviously come out of them,
Well, that they were behind the promotion of it, perhaps, and,
exactly.
and enormity
Well, you
of
hire
the
the
wave of the invasion.
You get the people hire and then
Because they would think in that way. They
Right.
would think like invasion.
and Hard Day's Night. Well, it was all hired extras chasing them around all over the place.
Right.
But
Right.
some of it was real. Who was it George telling a story about, I guess, after they had gone to see the Maharishi, and I don't know, what was that, like 66 or something like that, 65, I don't know. So they're in India, and pretty much only George is really into it. They're there with Mia Farrow and all that. And so apparently Maharishi comes to London to visit the Beatles, or just come to London. And apparently so they're driving in a limousine with the four Beatles, and he's in there, and everybody's chasing the limousine and screaming. And the Maharishi thinks that they're there for him. He's like, "Oh, I did not realize I was so popular in England."
You're not.
You're not.
Take some more acid and have it not affect you.
Right.
Well, apparently the reason everybody went to his ashram is because it was the first ashram in India to have air conditioning.
That'd be a real draw,
right?
Yeah. Yeah, the Beatles. So what's interesting about the Beatles, if you look at them during their Hamburg phase, they look like teddy boys. They've got leather jackets and their hair is back.
Mm-hmm.
But then when they go back to England, they look different. And they've got, the bowl cuts, sort of the long hair.
They've been manicured.
Quasi Prince Valiant look, right? And that changes everything, because the teddy boy look is something along the lines of like Eddie Cochran and Gene Vincent and American rock and rollers, but then they get a redo, and it changes everything.
That's a good point.
Yeah, they were like very into Buddy Holly, because that the Beatles is their version of the Crickets.
Right, the Crickets. But what's interesting is if you go back and this is what Hans brought up. When I interviewed him, it was one of those things. It was like one of those bell ringing moments for me. And he made this observation that if pre-Beatles, you had Chuck Berry, Little Richard, Jerry Lee Lewis, Elvis Presley, Eddie Cochran, right? All those guys, number one.
Jerry Lee Lewis.
Well, yeah, they're all names. They're all individuals.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Now, if you had a band, you had Buddy Holly and the Crickets, or Bill Haley and the Comets. And then something happens to all of them. Like Chuck Berry goes to jail. Little Richard is just kind of too weird for a lot of people. So he sort of isn't really picked up on by radio. Pat Boone starts doing his songs. And then Elvis goes in the army, right? Jerry Lee Lewis marries his cousin. So nobody wants to book him. So all these guys that were at Buddy Holly dies. So all these guys are at the kind of the vanguard of rock and roll. They all get kind of put on ice or die or get, marginalized. And then you have this weird little phase of like doo-wop and Dion and the Belmonts and Frankie Valli, some surf rock, folk music, and rock and roll's in this weird kind of place. It's not really.
Sorry to cut in, but by the way, surf rock comes out of Armenian traditional tunes. Dick Dale took Armenian traditional tunes and sped them up, and that's where surf rock comes from.
Yeah. Dick, I had a discussion with this guy the other day about Dick Dale and isn't Dick Dale Greek? Isn't he Greek?
I think it's Armenian.
All right. Close, but yeah. Yeah. So,
sorry to cut you off.
That's okay. But it's a good point, because surf rock was kind of big. And then all of a sudden, Well, I guess, the Beach Boys starting to come around 61, 62, right
Right.
around there.
Right.
And I don't think they're part of the Tavistock thing. But if you look at what happens with the Beatles, it's not like John Lennon and the Beatles, or it's not like Mick Jagger and the Rolling Stones. You do get a little Eric Burdon and the Animals, but then they become the Animals. The Who is the Who. The Kinks are the Kinks, right? So they move away from the artist and they move into groups.
Collectivism.
So
Yes.
is that what you think the significance of that is?
Yes.
Collectivism?
Yes. They're moving people into collectivism.
Right.
have
So
another
the
question
so it's the Aquarian thing.
that arose in my mind that I wonder what your opinion is of. You said Elvis went into the army and a little click went in my mind. Do you think that that was like an MK Ultra entree for him?
Yes, I do.
Because once they had him
Yes.
separated out from his support
Yes.
system,
Yes.
it seems to be the theme, like with Candy Jones. She got sick when she was on tour, and they take
USR,
people.
right.
Sirhan was, had that accident as a jockey with the racehorse, and then he was in the hospital. He thought he was in a week, and his roommate said, "Man, you were gone a month." Right.
Right. Yeah. Elvis is clearly not quite the same guy when he comes out. He might look the same, but he marries Priscilla, who is what, like
Handler.
14. I don't think she's too young to be a
Oh,
Sandler.
too young. Yeah.
14. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. She's now I think she might have been 15, but they lied. They lied about her age. Because they had seen what had happened to Jerry Lee Lewis. And I guess she was the daughter of like a CEO or something like that when he was in Germany, right? When he was in the army.
Really?
Yeah. So they bring her back, and apparently this is not Tavistock related, but he brings her back to Memphis, Graceland, and they hardly let her out because she looks so young. And they did not want the American public to get wind of the fact that, Elvis Presley was married to a fairly significant minor, right? So there are stories about her kind of getting cabin fever inside of Graceland, and Elvis's Memphis mafia, trying to cool her down and talk to her and all that shit. But then you have Colonel Tom Parker, it's not even his name. He's not even a colonel. Very strange character. He gets a hold of Elvis, and that's his handler. Tom Parker is Elvis's handler, and he signs Elvis up to these really terrible deals where the only albums he's going to make are going to be soundtracks to movies that he's going to do, and each movie gets successively worse. And it's almost like dialing in his tunes, and eventually, I think, around 1969, 1970, he's had enough of Tom Parker and starts to kind of extricate himself from his clutches. But yeah, I do think something happened to him, and he's handled, right. And that's an interesting point too, because that's kind of at the inception of the Vietnam War. And if Elvis could be a soldier, well, guess what? You could too, right?
Right.
You're a hero now. And
right.
You could be a rock star, by joining the army.
Yeah, because in World War II, all the ball players lost 2-3 years of their career. DiMaggio and Ted Williams and, all these guys, really did, it was like so bad that the St. Louis Browns won a World Series, I think, in the 40s or something like that.
The talent drain.
But the other thing, I was want to mention, because Tavistock sets up the dichotomy. So that's why I was wondering about the Stones preceding the Beatles to the Ed Sullivan Show, which I think is true.
Let's look it up.
Either way, they were set up as the good boy, bad boy dichotomy.
Right.
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 And then that, kind of plays out, even though, Lennon makes a kind of mess of his life in a lot of ways for a while.
So the Rolling Stones appear on Ed Sullivan on 10/25/64.
64. Okay, so it's the year after. Okay.
Yeah.
Then I'm wrong. Somehow I thought they preceded the Beatles.
I'm just going to make sure between 64 and 69, the Rolling Stones were on
just before Halloween.
Ed Sullivan 6 times.
6 times.
Yeah.
And he was so droll. The most unlikely pairing, isn't it?
Well, he's just a little maestro.
What a strange man.
He's the ringmaster.
Yeah. I saw a clip of Denny McLean playing organ on the Ed Sullivan show.
He was a great pitcher for the Detroit Tigers.
Oh, he was great.
Last man to win 30 games.
He was a hell of an organ player. My God.
Yes.
Yeah.
I recall. Played like pipe organ or something.
Wow.
Well, they did a version of The Girl from Ipanema.
Oh,
with him. It was actually really good. I mean,
that clip we saw of The Girl from Ipanema.
It was a whole story about the song and
but it
things
was
about
so
it.
well done, and it was.
It's a big video on YouTube, the strangest pop song ever made, or something like that.
Yeah, it was very compelling. I didn't quite understand it, but it was compelling.
Right.
Because the woman who was singing was compelling. There was something about a quality that she had that was very mysterious. Anyway.
Yeah. So Tavistock does create the duality, right? You have the good guys, the good boys, the Beatles, and the bad boys, the Rolling Stones. Right?
Yeah. And then when they stop playing, and you've got the Who destroying their instruments, and Jimi Hendrix, basically doing rituals on stage, lighting his guitar on fire, and that whole thing, it's.
Oh, how cool is that?
And then you got the Cowsills on the other side. I don't know, The
Cowsills are a very interesting story.
Okay, let's hear it.
Well, the Cowsills were actually very talented, and they could all play really well, and they were managed by a maniacal father. And I think so. The Cowsills were the template for the Partridge Family.
Okay.
Right.
Because the mom was in the band, right? In the Cowsills.
Yes, I was always accused of looking like Danny Most. Because
Danny Bonaducci or Donnie Most.
Am I getting them confused?
You are. One was Ralph Malph on Happy Days. The other was
the guy in the Partridge Family was
Danny Bonaducci.
Danny. Okay.
He's Italian. He's Italian.
It's a good name.
My hair was very much like his, very wavy red kind of thing.
So he was the wise ass on the Partridge Family. The Partridge Family, probably another Tavistock CIA creation, right? Even though it's based on the Cowsills. The Cowsills had a father. There's no father in the Partridge Family, which I think is part of the program, right?
Right, just the manager, the goofy manager.
Reuben Kincaid plays the manager.
You remember all these names. Reuben.
I know
Kincaid.
it's sick. It's sick, isn't it?
It's good sick. I wish I had that sick.
We're just here to prop up your brilliance.
Yes.
Well, so what's interesting is Shirley Jones actually is the mother of David Cassidy, right? She's his real life mother.
Right. And then and the other creations at the time were the black and white antipodes of the Jackson 5 and the
Osmonds.
The Osmonds, right?
The Osmonds are weird. They are the antipodes for sure. But the Osmonds come out of that whole Muscle Shoals era. And the guy who started Muscle Shoals, the whole sound, basically got everything taken away from him by Ahmet Erdogan, who is not a good guy.
Atlantic Records?
Atlantic Records. He told him that he would fuck him over. And because they had a session with Aretha Franklin that went sideways. And eventually he came into Muscle Shoals, stole the whole Muscle Shoals crew and said, okay, this is your studio now. And they continued to make really, really good music. So the guy that started Muscle Shoals had to branch off and do something else. And he did. And he got behind the Osmond brothers. And that's how the Osmonds got a lot of their big hits, because of the production. So the guy who started Muscle Shoals. What's his name?
Yeah, there was a good documentary on that whole thing. Watched
Yeah,
it a few years
very,
ago.
really good documentary.
And there was something mystic about the river there, right? Where there was like an ancient native tradition
It's the Tennessee River.
of being able to sit on that river and hear the music coming from it, right? Something
that
like
the
that.
river was singing.
Yeah.
It was
Yeah, it was
the
really
the singing
beautiful.
river.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, I think it starts off with a woman. Rick Hall's the guy's name, and he has Fame Studios. And Rick Hall is also, believe it or not, he's an Aquarian, right? And he's breaking with tradition. That guy he's got a weird Aquarian life. Anyway, yeah. So the film starts off, and it has a woman who was relocated to Oklahoma, Trail of Tears or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And she tried to find a river in Oklahoma that sounded like that river.
Right.
And it didn't sing to her like that river.
Right.
So she had to walk back, and it like took her like 2 years to walk back or something like that to that exact river, which is by Muscle Shoals. So yeah, now we have this whole recording thing going on, right? And Tavistock has got to be the epicenter of that. They're in England. They're psychically driving the Beatles, and we have the split between the youth and the older generation, right?
Yeah, the generation gap.
The
was
generation
promulgated
gap
by them.
Yep, absolutely. And the hair thing was huge, right? It was the hairstyle.
Huge.
It separated, divided generations. If you had long hair, you were no good hippie faggot.
Right. That was the
And the afros.
Iconic Crosby, Stills and Nash. Almost cut my hair.
Right. Which is ironic.
Mm-hmm.
I was talking with Danny about this, and the whole thing around the creation of this culture, which is also very much linked to commercialism. What's interesting is that it's so supposedly anti-commercial, and yet so many products come out of that period of time that are geared towards the baby boomers, who are going to be the ones that will really partake in this kind of rebellion culture, musical culture, and things set up in ways that do set them apart from their previous generation. And we're on that continuum now, right? I mean,
example, what are some things that
I mean,
I'm trying to imagine what products.
Well, first of all, fashion is going to be very significant.
Okay, so that's a product.
Yeah, you're going to get into mini skirts, which are going to be huge, right? That's going to be a revolt against traditional fashion.
And hot pants and go-go boots.
The two-piece bathing suit, not the one-piece bathing suit, but the two-piece bathing suit.
And the bikini, yeah. Okay.
The bikini.
Bikini atoll.
Right. Bikini atoll, yeah.
Right, and that's another Tavistockian thing is women's liberation, feminism.
Right.
Those concepts also come out of Tavistock.
Well, gee, I wonder why, because one of the architects of Tavistock is Edward Bernays.
Right.
They bring in Edward Bernays.
Wasn't he on the board of, was it?
Wellington House.
Wellington House.
Right. So they bring him in along with Walter Lippmann. And you can see the Hydra effect, because the article that I was working off of yesterday talks about all these other connections to Tavistock, like Stanford Research Institute, the Rand Corporation, MIT, Naval Intelligence, like they're all part of the same network.
Well,
yes, I have a
to
list
make
of
a
them.
tie back to the beginning of our beginning conversation about the thought form healing. When I did my session 2-3 years ago with Ivor and Diane, one of the thought forms that came through for me that was problematic and holding me in some kind of problem situation was a cephalopod. And with all those tentacles. And then like the very next day after that session, I was taking a class with Bonnie, Bonnie. And we went out for lunch, and I walked into the restaurant, and they had like at the counter where you just walk up and order, there was this absolutely beautiful porcelain. There's a lot of clay artists here in Asheville. Porcelain cephalopod
Oh, wow.
from the ceiling.
Jeez.
It was about 2.5 feet wide, beautiful white
Beautiful.
porcelain with perfect tentacles hanging over the cash register. I was like, holy smokes, you want to talk about validation. But that cephalopod is
Yeah.
really, the image works so well because that's what we're dealing with. There are so many tentacles to what we're having to like cut them off one at a time.
Oh, I just think you have to get the head.
Yeah.
Well, that's a start.
Yeah.
I think Tavistock is the head.
Yes.
Yeah, and you go ahead.
No, I was just going to look for one that looked like it.
Here we go. There's all kinds of interesting cephalopods.
Yeah. They're very cool.
Yeah, so the tentacles that
It's
you
more
were
like
just
that white one, octopusy looking one.
the tentacles that you were just going over, two of them are the Rand Corporation and the Hudson Institute, and pretty much every person in the Project for New American Century belonged to one of those two.
That's really interesting. That is a very interesting connection. So people who are not aware of the Project for the New American Century, that's basically the neocons, right?
Right, the
is the
founding of the
neocons.
neocons, and
William
they were,
Crystal.
they set up the whole Bush, the initial things that the Bush, George Bush presidency came out with. And the concept, actually, it was written just at the end of the Clinton presidency. The concept, we've won, Russia sucks. It's over for them. Now we're the sole dominant power, and this is what we need to do. And among them was we were supposed to be able to fight wars on multiple fronts, which is
Right.
what we did, and went right into Afghanistan and then into Iraq. But those are things that came out of the Rand Corporation and the Hudson. Then, as you said, the Stanford Research Institute, the Sloan School of MIT. So the Wharton School of Business. So they also were controlling the business schools and the people that were coming out of them. Brookings Institute, all those guys.
But let's not forget that one of the PNAC statements that was so shocking was they said, what we need
Mhm.
now is a new Pearl Harbor event.
Mm-hmm.
And then they had it was all up on the internet
And-
after 9/11.
Every newspaper.
We read it. It's like they actually had the moxie to put that up on the internet,
Mm-hmm.
that's what they needed. And that's what they
Mm-hmm.
did.
And
That's revelation of the method.
Right, everything, yeah, as soon as 9/11 happened, it was the new Pearl Harbor. Everybody's, it was just in lockstep. So that's the other aspect of Tavistock, of course, is through the CIA, through everything else, is the running of the media. And
It
that's
really seems like Tavistock is the hub.
Oh, absolutely.
Everything kind of emanates out from Tavistock, and then the different nodes will pick up
It's-
on it and then execute what they need to
Yeah,
execute.
then you got
on that
Stanford
plan.
Research Institute over here and Columbia University. and
Esalen,
Esalen,
Right.
University of Pennsylvania, right?
I
They're-
said the Wharton Business School,
Wharton
University of
Business School,
Pennsylvania,
yeah.
right.
Mhm.
So here's this other thing that I
and then
came
there's the
across,
Vatican.
because actually I found my notes from the last show we did
Yeah.
on this, which I highly recommend people see, just because that's the one where we had the Bluebird playing behind us, the black and white.
Oh, right. Yeah. That
That
was
was-
movie behind us. And I think that's one of our best
That was a
shows.
stroke of genius you had, Robert, with
that was cool. Yeah.
It was so beautiful. That
So-
worked so well.
Microwave weaponry begins at Tavistock in the 50s. And then from 65 to 70, they have something called Operation Pandora. What a lovely name. And they tested microwaves and human behavior and mind control through the microwaves. So
And that's in the 50s, right?
50s into the 60s, yes.
So what are they doing with frequencies, sound, and popular music?
Right,
Oh,
right. Well, I think, that's, of
As-
course, especially now. I mean,
as evidenced by I can never remember the person's name with that horrible satanic music
the
concert.
rap guy, Dwayne.
What's his
where-
name? It was a big deal.
I
where
think
they-
last year where they had the people die at the
Oh, yeah.
What was
Right.
his name?
That guy.
Travis.
Travis Scott.
Travesty.
The guy sounds like
Travis Scott. Yeah.
Just doesn't sound like a rap name, so I never.
Yeah,
Doesn't
and he
land.
doesn't look like a Scot, but regardless.
You know, it's really, really interesting. I was at a friend's house. I think it was around 2019, I think. I was hanging out at her place and she puts this music on and I'm listening to it. I'm thinking, well, it's kind of interesting. But it's also sounding just a little derivative in some ways. So I asked her, I said, well, who is this? She said, oh, it's Travis Scott. And her son was still is, I think, into Travis Scott. So she's playing this record. And some of it was just like kind of straight up ambient, almost spoken word. It was like, what is this guy doing? Right. Clearly there was some very different musical influences going on. And there were actually a few of the songs on that she played and she kind of liked. It was like, wow, this is not like mumble rap or something like this. It was much more artistic and atmospheric. But you know, whatever. I mean, that was just a notice. Yeah.
These kids are wide open to that. They have no protection. It just goes straight in.
Well, yeah, it does go straight in. And yeah, we could get into the whole thing on hip hop, but getting back to the music thing in Tavistock, I think it's huge, right? And one of the things I was talking about with Danny, was it Wednesday, is like the whole transgender scene in London, which takes place with people like David Bowie and T-Rex and
New York Dolls.
The New York Dolls, clearly in New York City. But there's this epicenter of this whole transgender thing happening in London. And David Bowie, let me show you this one thing. And
Gary Glitter was English?
Yes. Gary Glitter was English, still is English. So David Bowie in 1964, so he was quite young in 1964, but he was somehow, I guess we could play this too. Let's see if I can do this. Yeah. He was somehow the head of the Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Men with Long Hair.
Oh, stop.
And they got on the BBC. Like, how does this happen? Now, David Bowie's he's a nobody at this point.
That's like literally groomed.
He's being groomed. So let's watch this. This is about 4 minutes. Wow. And I'd bet dollars to dimes that this is Tavistock.
17-year-old David. So that was when he was just David Jones.
It's all got to stop. They've had enough. The worms are turning. The rebellion of the long hairs is getting underway. They're tired of persecution. They're tired of taunts. They're tired of losing their jobs. They're tired of being sent home from college. They're tired of being sent home from school. They're tired even of being refused the dole. So with the nucleus of some of his friends, a 17-year-old Davy Jones has just founded the Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Long-Haired Men. Well, here we are. Long-haired men.
He looks terrified.
9 inches long before you
he doesn't look comfortable, that's for sure.
Have you?
Yes.
Now, exactly who's being cruel to you?
Well, I think we're all fairly tolerant, but for the last 2 years we've had comments like "darling" and "can I carry a handbag" thrown at us. I think it's just had to stop now.
But does this surprise you that you get this kind of comment? Because after all, you've got really rather long hair, haven't you?
We have, yes. Yeah, it's not too bad, really. No, I like it, and I think we all like long hair. And we don't see why other people should persecute us because of this.
How are you going to set about this campaign?
Well, I don't know. I think the real sort of thing we should do is to try and get more followers behind us so that we can sort of march in protest, sort of ban the bomb all over again, you know, only against hair, you know, people persecuted.
Baldermaster.
And I think gradually it will work, yeah.
Now, you see, a lot of people, you can't tell the difference between a man and a woman, can they, if you've got your hair that long?
Oh, well, that's ridiculous. If the stage has got to the point when you can't tell either sex by a few inches of hair, I think it's a pretty poor show, don't you?
Yeah, I do. I tell it. Yeah. Now, why did you grow your hair long in the first place?
Well, I think most of us just like it long, whereas some like it short. Others like us like it long.
But did you grow it long in order to stand out in a crowd?
Mine was an accident. I just forgot to have it cut for quite some time.
Yeah, for a long time, I should think. well, I mean, did you get this off the Rolling Stones, really?
Oh, no.
Oh, no.
But did any of you have your hair growing long more than 2 years ago,
Yes.
say?
Oh, yeah.
Did you? Before the Rolling Stones ever did?
Well, it takes a long time to get this length, you know.
It just
It's
isn't
quite
rather
easy.
That's not
nice.
2 years for
Just
both.
because the
them
Rolling
out.
Stones.
Can I ask you what you say when you go into the hairdressers? When you go into the hairdressers,
I don't go.
last year.
don't you go and have it shampooed and set?
No,
Our
no.
mums do it, if anything.
Your mothers do it?
Mom's doing it.
Do they?
Yeah, very good at it. They're better than I could ever be.
When was the last time that any of you ever went to a barber?
3 years ago.
3 years.
I went just over a year ago.
But exactly how are you going to stop people being cruel to you? Come on, that's your idea.
Well, if anybody is chucked out of a factory job or removed from a public bar or saloon bar, you'll get a petition written up and sent to either the LCC, the people that hold the publishing's license.
But do you think this will do any good?
Well, it
I
better
think
do.
it will help. People will eventually, I think,
But do you really think that many people are on your side, is what I'm saying?
Oh, yes, there's
Yes.
quite a few,
Oh, no.
1,000 teenagers over Britain.
All of them with long hair?
No, lots of them would
No,
like
not
to
lots of
have
them.
long hair.
They haven't
just
got
wishing
the...
they had got long hair.
Either their company they work with or their parents don't allow them to have long hair.
No, well, I can well understand this, can't you? Mind you, I'm talking out of a sort of sense of jealousy, in a way, seeing you over there with so much, and I should have gone and had a haircut today.
So there you go.
You know, and I'm going to bet each one of them was had their hair styled and sprayed by the BBC hairdresser and makeup person before they went on the air.
Was it kind of
Absolutely.
curious? Why were they standing? Only what, 2 people were sitting or 3? It's just
I don't
kind
know,
of
maybe
odd.
just to get them all in this frame.
I think it was probably to get them all in the frame, but I think it's quite odd, right? That Davy Jones, who, I mean, he did not have a record out or anything. Okay. This is all pre Bowie, right? He eventually had to change his name to Bowie because of Davy Jones from the Monkees. But who's behind that? You know, who's, and by the way, they're also sort of dabbling in cancel culture a little bit. You know, like, well, we'll write up a petition and send it to the LLC or whatever it is. And then,
At
you know,
LCC, but I think he must have
LCC.
been LLC.
maybe it's LCC. Maybe it has something to do with some kind of a
Licensing commission.
licensing.
Don't know.
Right. So we'll cancel these fuckers if they kick us out. Right. So it's kind of the beginnings of cancel culture a little bit.
Start somewhere.
But Bowie
Right.
would just keep going, and he would just go full on into, you know, like the back cover of Hunky Dory where he's wearing a dress.
Yeah, and you see all of them are dressed rather nicely.
Right.
You know, their ties are perfectly formed, you
Well,
know.
didn't he have a tie bar on his nice white
He
collar?
may have, but either way, you
Yeah.
know, they're all, you know, impeccably, well,
Mhm.
except for the guy with the little beard. And he seemed like the really angry one. You could watch his fists were kind of balled up while he was in the back there. If you got to look at him.
Right.
But
Yeah.
but you know, again, Tavistockian, yes, and again, you know, this sort of blurring. This is really the beginning of the blurring of the sexes.
Mhm.
You know, start with the hair, that's easy. You know,
Right.
then move on to the clothes.
Mhm.
You know, which was in this is what, 64, 65, 64?
That was 64.
64. So by 67, 66, you know, within 2 years, you know, the fashion is completely turned upside down,
Mhm.
you know, and interesting that he mentioned the Stones, not the Beatles. you
Right.
know,
Yeah.
about the influence,
Right.
know.
And they're like, oh no. Oh yeah, right.
And is Bowie's first hit Ground Control Major Tom?
Bowie's first hit is Space Oddity. Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
It was Space Oddity. And it was kind of an accident the way that it happened. He had a band called the Lower Five or something like that prior to Space Oddity. That was an act. I think he was supposed to write the lyrics, believe it or not, for Frank Sinatra. I think it was a Frank Sinatra tune. I don't know how that came about, but I think eventually was it Serge Gainsbourg or something like that wrote I Did It My Way. I think there's this weird connection between Space Oddity and My Way, and that it didn't work for somebody was hiring him to do something. I don't think he knew it was Frank Sinatra though. And then he wound up creating Space Oddity, which became a much bigger thing for him. But I think that's a classic Tavistock moment there.
Yeah. And did you, I mean, you must have seen the clip of Bowie with Bing Crosby on Bing Crosby's Christmas special.
Yeah.
I saw it. I saw it when it played when I was a kid.
Okay. So, that's really interesting. So, he's got his inner crooner in there.
Well, Bowie was really influenced by Anthony Newley. That was one of his musical influences. And Anthony Newley was kind of like a crooner. Anthony Newley did show tunes and ballads. Right.
But I find it interesting that so many people, especially the one that really sticks out is Howard Devoto of Magazine and of the Buzzcocks, who when he puts out a solo album is positive. And he does it with Magazine too. He croons. He really loves to. And the the guy from the Stranglers, Hugh Cromwell. Mm-hmm. For the Stranglers also. It's like when these guys get a chance, they actually love to do that old sort of crooning stuff. It's real interesting.
Yeah, I think another guy who was really influential to a lot of these singers was Scott Walker, who was part of this group called the Walker Brothers. And I think two of them were English and he was American. He came over. They're not even brothers. But if you go back and you listen to their music, there's a lot of crooning going on in Scott Walker's music. And he became kind of a very interesting composer. I think he put out a record or two on 4AD. And Bowie actually produced a documentary on him called 21st Century Man, which is a very interesting documentary. So those were their influences. Those are the records their parents listened to, I think, in their home, like Bing Crosby and Perry Como and a lot of those characters. So Tavistock, I think, keeps this thing rolling, right?
So the point is these are just further iterations of the same thing.
Right. It starts off with like the Society for Long-Haired Men.
Mm-hmm.
And where are we now? We're in transgender world. And and whatever other programs they have going on, right? This one seems to be a current thread through Tavistock.
Because it leads to AI.
It does lead to AI. It also leads to
no gender. Right. It's genderless. It's anything goes. There's no identity whatsoever. There's no personality. There's no assignment. And no dharma.
Yeah.
And it's all. Go ahead.
Keep on.
It all just. To me, that's where the trajectory is headed.
Well, in order to get there,
the foundations.
Well, in order to get there, you have to destroy the West, and you have to destroy the cultural foundations of the West, which do include Christianity.
They do.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
So, and I wanted to throw in that in 2018, this guy named Richard, and this is where it went overt, right? So everything is overt now, right? So Richard Allen, who was, I don't know, a VP up in Tavistock or something, some very high up in Tavistock, joins Facebook as their vice president of public policy. Right. And of course, who's the big face in Facebook, of course, is the the corporate face of the metaverse, of the movement into transhumanism. So,
Right.
so that's, if you're looking for an actual connection, it's right there. So his guy name is Richard Allen, and I don't know fully if he's still there or not. But
Isn't he knighted? Is he the one who's a sir?
no, that's
No?
you're thinking of the guy with
Richard Branson.
Malak Brown.
Oh, right.
Lord. Well, I wasn't.
He could have been he could be a sir. In fact, he may
Somehow
be.
I thought he was a knighted. Anyway.
When I write people's names down, I don't put the sir on. They don't get a sir from me.
I
Or
like that,
Dom.
Steve.
Or Dom. I'm such a rebel. I refuse to acknowledge they care so much.
So I have a corporate page for Richard Allen and the Tavistock Institute. Let's take a look at him.
Because that brings us to the current day.
Mm.
Mhm.
So Tavistock is really into what they call organizational development. And organizational development goes back into the beginning, theoretically, of the Industrial Revolution or the Second Industrial Revolution, and trying to figure out how to get more productivity out of people.
Mm,
Right.
boy,
Yes. So, right.
I remember that when I was working, that
Wor-
word came up all
Yeah.
the time.
Worker of the month comes right out of Tavistock.
Absolutely. Worker of the month comes right out of Tavistock.
Right.
Absolutely.
It's freaking everywhere.
Everyone gets a trophy.
And you cannot escape it.
So let's see this guy. My expertise is working with organizations on the development, there's your organizational development, and redesign of key processes, particularly in relation to organizational performance, management, change management, quality management, impact assessment, strategic planning, capacity building, and improved customer focus. I've also provided
If only.
coaching and direct support to people undertaking this work within their own organizations. I have a background in organizational psychology.
Psychology, organizational psychology.
Yep. So this is the guy that principal researcher and consultant. I bring a strong curiosity about how organizational actors and stakeholders, there's that name, make sense of what organizations and programs do and achieve.
Yeah. Yes, right. The anti-vampire group will be stakeholders.
The anti-vampire group.
What about, how's the chat room doing? Are there any questions that people are bouncing around?
I don't know. We'll get to them in a second.
Okay.
We'll save some time, maybe about 15
Okay,
minutes
all
left.
right, out there, everybody, come up with some questions.
So, go ahead.
No, so, okay. When you go and look at the formation of Tavistock, there's a guy by the name of Oswald Spengler. And Spengler writes a book called The Decline of the West.
Right, 1918.
And that book becomes the Bible for Tavistock.
Oh, maybe we should read it.
And because it's about what happened theoretically in other dynasties or kind of nation states that ruled over time, right? And the conditions that led to their decline. And so Tavistock looks at it and says, well, we need to figure out how to make that happen faster, because that's what they're ultimately doing. And then you see that the progression to where we are now with the trans agenda is exactly that. It undermines every single institution that it even transcends things like social Marxism.
And isn't the internet the magic carpet ride to make all that happen?
Absolutely.
In warp speed.
Yep. So let's get into Kurt Lewin in a second, because I think he's very interesting and very important here. But one of the things that that you keep hearing now, you can hear the messaging. The messaging comes right out of Tavistock and then gets broadcast wherever it needs to get broadcast. So the messaging now is not white nationalism, it's Christian white nationalism.
Oh,
okay.
When you hear people on the so-called left, or people that are opposed to this idea of fascism, they now use Christian white
Interesting.
nationalism.
Yeah. Well, they're the ones standing up to it right now.
You can't help but notice that we've noticed that the Christians are the one who are leading the charge against this tyranny. You know, I don't see the Buddhists standing up for that. I don't see the yogis coming forward and saying this can't
Well, the
stand.
Buddhists will set themselves on fire.
Yeah, but not for the end of this tyranny.
No,
They're all about the masks.
Well, I mean, I was at an event with the Dalai Lama one day, and I was kind of behind the scenes, and so I saw how that world works a little bit.
What'd you see?
Well, first of all, he's heavily guarded by the State Department. I mean, heavily guarded.
Well,
We're talking, you know, almost as much protection for the Dalai Lama as for a president.
State.
Yeah, and so there's that. There's also a shit ton of money behind the Dalai Lama.
There is.
Shit ton. You know,
Yep.
he didn't get out by him. He didn't get out broke. I mean, he got out with yak loads of gold.
Well, also there's more that's come, obviously, because
Yes.
when I saw him at Stanford, he had basically two public addresses. One was, "Oh, you'll like this, Steve." Steve and Kent opened for him at
right.
Stanford. Yeah.
Oh, really? Oh.
Yeah. So there was that, and that was part of the entire student body. And it was at Maples Pavilion, which is where the basketball team plays. And then they have a chapel on the campus, and that was for all the elite donors.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where all the money people went to go listen to the Dalai Lama.
Yeah. Okay. And Richard Gere was like running that for a long time.
Well, yeah, I think so. He wasn't there that day. It was that was a pretty interesting time because the United States had gone into Iraq, and it was, getting very messy. And somebody asked him a question, the Dalai Lama a question, about that. And like, how different is that than, say, the Chinese going into Tibet? And he basically said that, they were doing their best to spread democracy. And I thought, man, this is a setup.
Yep.
Right. This guy is not involved in the truth at all.
No.
He's an agent of the state.
Yeah.
Wow.
Big vaccine promoter.
Yep. Let's get into Kurt Lewin, because he has a theory that is quite, I wouldn't call it interesting, but it's intrinsic, I think, to Tavistock and this whole trans agenda thing that we got going on. So this is Kurt Lewin. He's part of the German Empire, now Poland. He's a Virgo. Go figure that. German-American psychologist, known as one of the modern pioneers of social, organizational, and applied psychology in the United States. During his professional career, Lewin applied himself to three general topics: applied research, action research, and group communication. Lewin is often recognized as the founder of social psychology and was one of the first to study group dynamics and organizational development, which is what we were just talking about. A review of general psychology survey published in 2002 ranked Lewin as the 18th most cited psychologist of the 20th century. So he was born into a Jewish family in Moglino, County Moglino, province of Posen, Russia, now modern Poland. It was a small village of about 5,000 people, about 150 of whom were Jewish. Lewin received an Orthodox Jewish education at home. He was one of four children born into a middle-class family. His father owned a small store. Family lived in an apartment above the store. His father, Leopold, owned a farm jointly with his brother, Max. The farm was legally owned by a Christian because Jews were not permitted to own farms at the time. Wow. So the family moves to Berlin. So Lewin and his brothers could receive a better education, blah, 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 blah. Okay, let's move forward. And he's involved in the Gestalt School of Psychology. And then we see Max Wertheimer, who is a big Frankfurt School person, right?
Right.
And then you've got Wolfgang Kohler. He also joined the Psychological Institute at the University of Berlin. Lewin had tried to negotiate a teaching position as the chair of psychology, as well as the creation of a research institute at the Hebrew University. Lewin, often associated with the early Frankfurt School,
Okay.
originated by influential group, largely Jewish Marxists at the Institute for Social Research in Germany.
Which is the
That is the
School.
Frankfurt School.
Right. And then here we go. So he leaves Germany.
When Hitler
1933, right. Institute members had to disband, moving to England, then to America. In that year, he met with Eric Trist of the London Tavistock Institute. Trist was impressed with his theories and then went on to use them in his studies on soldiers during the Second World War. So here we go. This is the interlocking moment between
Very good.
Frankfurt School and Tavistock.
Right. He does. He gets to do both. What a life.
Right.
Wow.
And then eventually he moves to the United States in 1933, but he's still involved in Tavistock. He becomes a visiting research professor at Stanford, which we were just talking about. And then this is interesting too, the Child Welfare Research Station. They were very into children.
That's scary.
And twins.
Yes.
In particular.
They're very into children and twins. So this is the one thing that Lewin comes up with, and it's the notion of genidentity. Okay, so what is genidentity? It's very interesting.
He coined the notion.
Yeah. So as introduced by Kurt Lewin, genidentity is an existential relationship underlying the genesis of an object from one moment to the next. Okay. What we usually consider to be an object really consists of multiple entities, which are the phases of the object at various times.
Okay.
Two objects are not identical because they have the same properties in common, but because one is developed from the other. Lewin introduced the concept in 1922 at Habilitationsschrift der Bergift der Genies at Physik, Biology, and I'm going to not even try that one. It is today perhaps the only surviving evidence of Lewin's influence on the philosophy of science. However, this concept never became an object of widespread discussion and debate in its own terms. Rather, it was extracted from its context by philosophers such as Rudolf Carnap, Hans Hermes. There's a guy for you, Steve. Hans Hermes. Hans Reichenbach, Adolf Grunbaum, and Bas van Frassen, who incorporated into this concept their own theories such as the topology of the universe and the axiomization of mechanics. Lewin's idea was to compare and contrast the concept of genidentity in various branches of science, thereby laying bare the characteristic structure of each and making their classification possible in the first place. So they're not coming right out and saying this, right? I'm actually taking a bit of a leap here, is that, well, here we go. Genidentity, so defined, is postulated to have various characteristics such as symmetry, transitivity, density, and continuity. When reviewed in light of contemporary standards of logical precision, it becomes clear that Lewin had the correct intuition, even though he did not have the benefit of a highly developed terminology or definition of theory or modern day symbolic language. So what I think he's actually moving towards is gender identity or gender fluidity, because you're not the thing, right? You are not the object, and you could be anything along the way or the evolution of that object. So I think that genidentity, and they're not fleshing this out, but I do think it is connected to gender fluidity because it's in the same ballpark.
Oh, I thought he was saying that it was that there were qualities of it that were repeated. In Sanskrit, you would call it a kashana, a discrete unit of time. So kashana by kashana. No,
I don't think that's what he's saying.
That's not what
No. He's saying that you, Chris, and you, Steve,
are not the same from minute to minute.
You're not Chris and Steve. That you're an amalgam of all these other parts of Chris and Steve. And at any point in time, those various parts could take precedent over the objective Chris and Steve.
Well, it's almost, it's almost like,
like an altar?
Yeah, it's almost like altars. Well,
I would agree.
it consists of multiple entities. So this
Like an
is
altar.
the impartation of the MK Ultra altar system
So this could be the,
upon some sort of, making it like a scientific finality or truism or
the
whatever
philosophy or
theory.
the psychology underpinnings of.
Well, then they get into this whole force field analysis stuff. So they're into like creating these states of torque and dynamic tension, fields of operation, where, things can happen, right? So for instance, force field analysis provides a framework for looking at the factors that influence the situation, originally social situations. It looks at forces that are driving the movement forward toward a goal, helping forces, or blocking movement toward a goal, hindering forces. Key to this approach was Lewin's interest in Gestaltism, understanding the totality and assessing the situation as a whole and not focusing on any individual aspects. Further, the totality of an individual or for an individual, their life space derives from their perception of their reality, not an objective viewpoint. And that is really the underpinning of almost everything in Marxism. Everything is subjective.
Right. So and then leading to social control through that.
Right. Exactly. The approach developed by Kurt Lewin is a significant contribution to the fields of social science, psychology, blah, 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 blah. Right. John R.P. French, who related it to organizational and industrial settings. So a lot of this is how to get people to do things. Mm-hmm. How to get them to do things. We have change process.
Right. This goes right back to the beginning, right?
Sensitivity training comes right out of Lewin. While working at MIT in 1946, Lewin received a phone call from the director of Connecticut State Interracial Commission requesting help find an effective way to combat religious and racial prejudices. He set up a workshop to conduct a change experiment, which laid the foundations for what is now known as sensitivity training. In 1947, this led to the establishment of the National Training Laboratories at Bethel, Maine. Carl Rogers believed that sensitivity training is perhaps the most significant social invention of this century. He gets into group dynamics. I mean, Lewin is like, he's like the Moses in a lot of ways of what happens at Tavistock. Mm-hmm. A lot of these things that we're experiencing now, right? They're born out of his work and him laying the foundation for that at Tavistock and these other think tanks.
Right. It's a perfect marriage because, again, Tavistock starts with getting people to go to a war that they don't want to fight. How do you, again, it's influencing the people to go against their own wishes.
This is right out of Alinsky right here. Lewin, then a professor at MIT, first coined the term action research in about 1944. It appears in his 1946 paper, Action Research and Minority Problems. In that paper, he described action research as a comparative research on the conditions and effects of various forms of social action and research leading to social action that uses a spiral of steps, each of which is composed of a circle of planning, action, and fact-finding about the result of the action. This is sometimes referred to as the Lewinian spiral. So this is really heady stuff, right?
Community organizing, right? Same thing.
Yep.
Exactly.
Yep.
Exactly.
Obama, was a community organizer. In Chicago.
And like as Chris and I were talking about this morning, it's like the final Tavistock ploy is to get us to join in a war against our own selves.
That's really brilliant. That is probably that's the highlight statement of today's show.
Right?
Get us to commit communal suicide.
Genocide. It's genocide.
Yeah.
Create genocide. And they're doing it. They're doing a bang up job. I mean, I may get flagged for this, right? But the whole transgender stuff is exactly that. It is really it is the cul-de-sac of the species. Because the species theoretically can't propagate after that.
Absolutely not.
And if there is propagation, it's going to happen by somebody else who's going to determine what that propagation is.
It's going to be in a test tube.
Exactly.
Right. Brings us back to Huxley's Brave New World with the test tubes.
Yeah.
And the full-blown caste system. Apparently Huxley was very interested in the caste system.
And also
you know,
Samuel Sagan's Bleeding Sun. He
Yeah.
talks about the same thing.
Well, yeah, those are all the various verses, the meta verses, etc.
So what I just wanted to drop into Lewin a little bit because he's such
Yeah.
a seminal figure.
Sure is.
And he's connected to all these people. He's got his, 1 foot in the Frankfurt School, who are all Marxists, right? He's got another foot into Tavistock and all of his research going on in the United States. And you can see the networks there. And I think if you eliminate a Tavistock, you get the head of the Hydra.
How do we do that?
They'd be making it would be a little more difficult.
Do you remember when they had that event in England, the 7-Eleven event? Do you remember that?
Yes.
I
The
don't.
subway
What do you
The
bombing.
subway? That was right
Oh, I
outside of
thought you-
Tavistock. That was right outside of Tavistock.
Was it really?
Yes. Let's look it up.
Well, I think one thing is Aikido is to bring them down with their own weight. And the other thing is, as I said in another podcast, we need an army of exorcists.
I think so. It was 7-Eleven, right? Wasn't that the
July 11th?
Yeah, I think so.
there was a guy that won a court case against that. 7-Eleven bomb, the London bombings. Oh, it was on 7/7, 7/7, not 7-Eleven.
Oh, was it?
No.
Yeah. So here we go.
So-
This is mind blowing. So the London bombings of 2005, also called 7 July attacks or 7/7 attacks,
Okay.
coordinated suicide bomb attacks on the London transit system on the morning of July 7, 2005, 8:50 a.m. Explosions tore through 3 trains on the London Underground, killing 39. An hour later, 13 people were killed when a bomb detonated on the upper deck of a bus in
Oh.
Tavistock Square.
Oh, I don't remember that.
Yeah, so it was right there.
700 people injured.
Yeah. And somebody wound up, there's a famous lawsuit where this guy sued, I think it was either the English government or the BBC. And it was about the information around this, and he actually won. He won his suit. So, and this was all very strange. And they were really selling the war in Islam stuff at that time.
Right. And then it flipped with the subsequent migrations coming in. And now the communities there, the Islamic communities, and many of them, not all of them, obviously, they're grooming people, and the police won't go in to do anything about it because it's racism if you do that.
Right. So it's the no-go zone.
And so everything is just flipped and screwy. And
Let's
then
go into chat and see if anybody has any questions or
and then you got Bono saying, "Oh, the Swedes should," I hate Bono.
What a colossal disappointment he became.
Oh, boy.
What a total tool.
He's
Isn't he too.
Isn't he over there with Zelensky?
He's probably
Was
in
that
Davos.
Bono? No, it
no,
wasn't
no.
Bono. It was somebody
No,
else.
they were there. Bono and the Edge
It was
went
Bono.
to
Okay, was
Ukraine
that why I remember
to do a
that?
little, jam
Yeah.
session. I can't think of anybody who's been
Nauseating.
such a colossal disappointment. Because when you two first started out, man, they were really good, and they weren't entirely political until they got into the bloody Sunday stuff, and even that I could handle.
It's a great record.
Yeah, I mean, but then everything for them turns with Achtung Baby. Like
Mhm.
they get really decadent, and something happens. They're not the same after that record.
Did he play at Biden's inauguration?
I don't know.
I don't know.
I
Somebody in
Anyway,
chat
but
remembers.
yeah,
I
Achtung Baby.
avoided
Let's ask the
Biden's.
chat.
Achtung Baby was like, Christina Aguilera shaving her head moment for you two.
Right.
They just went and remade themselves into a techno band, and they weren't.
Right.
And then they subsequently try to get back we're the greatest rock and roll band, and they couldn't.
But Achtung Baby was huge. That record was huge. It sold a ton of copies. And Brian Eno produced that, didn't he?
I don't know if he produced that one. He produced the three before that. Joshua something or another.
Okay, here's a question. Have the Crimis read Jason Horsley's pieces on transagendas in Tavistock?
No.
No. So funny, Oswald Spengler. I just started to dive into it this week because I did not read that piece, and I just had an intuition to go in and look up Tavistock and the transagenda, and then I saw the lawsuit by Kira Bell, who had sued was it Covenant House and Tavistock and won, but then Tavistock had that decision overturned. I'm going to try to get her on the show.
Yeah, I mean, it's just so pathetic. Well, these people need help, and we're here to help them.
That's often.
Sharon DeCaro says U2 played at Obama's inauguration.
Thank you.
They said it's a beautiful day.
One of the rare things I remember
they
about
say
music.
A beautiful day. Oh, Jesus Christ!
It's about 9/11, right?
Oh God! If he didn't resurrect himself, he'd be turning from in his grave.
Let's see. Meredith says both 7/7 and then also Cancer New Moon coming up. Titus 1:14. Patton was right. You're absolutely right. He was right.
That we should.
Let's see.
About what?
Yeah, well,
About
that's why they got about going in and
finishing something.
Yeah, we were fighting the wrong people.
Yes, and he died very soon after that. If I'm not mistaken.
This is a question from Wendy. Do you think the trans agenda extends through history to the eunuchs and the castrati? That's a really good question. I don't
think in the same iteration. I think this is more used, is weaponized. So I think it's more to bring us down as the human race. It's really going for the heart of the human race.
So you're talking about the castrati, choirs.
Yeah.
Which was a whole.
But also
that was
the
a whole
eunuchs
European thing.
in the.
Well,
in the courts.
Right. Super.
But I don't think that they were trying to do that to affect the rest of the village. Like, I don't think the village was interested in becoming castrati.
Right.
Which is different than what we have now, because they're trying to do everything in their power to make this trendy and sort of the new punk rock, right?
And the eunuchs were always slaves.
But I'll tell you, Wendy, I will say this, which is kind of interesting. David Bowie, when asked about transgenderism during his glam period and just shortly thereafter, like the Thin White Duke phase, he talked about how medicine men and shamans were either gay or were very much into their kind of, crossing sexual lines. And that's one of the reasons why they didn't live with the tribe, right? They're like, you're over here and you can go do that over here. And
they always lived on the outskirts.
They did live on the outskirts, and Bowie was well aware of this, and he, to some degree, used it as a justification for his love of cross-dressing and being sexually ambiguous. Yep. All right.
And I think that has always been with us, and I think there actually is a place for all of that, but it was never meant to break the surface. It was never meant to go mainstream.
No, the Heyokas would do that, and just for example, the Native American tribes, and who weren't necessarily the shaman, but they were always the contrarians to everything, to show that whatever you think is going on is going to change.
They were the Aquarians of the tribe. Camille Paglia has pointed out that every time a civilization got to a point where the sort of the prime directive was gay, homosexual, or trans, it signaled the end of that civilization.
Look at Caligula.
Yeah. We
just finished watching for the third time, or maybe fourth, I, Claudius, and I highly, highly, highly recommend it.
So I looked up Robert Graves' life. He was a weird dude.
I think so. I don't know a lot, but yeah.
He would have been right at home at Tavistock in some ways, based on his bio.
Yeah.
Did you ever see the Bob Guccione version of Caligula? Have you ever seen that?
No,
I don't think
No.
so. But somebody was
I think
mentioning
it was
it.
pretty dark, wasn't
Somebody
it?
was mentioning it to us the other day.
I think I remember when it came out and I was like, no, thanks.
Malcolm McDowell is in it.
Well, he's in I, Claudius in the PBS production.
Is Malcolm McDowell in that too?
Not Malcolm McDowell.
Who
no.
is that who played Caligula?
Caligula? John Hurt.
Oh, John Hurt. Sorry.
John Hurt.
Sorry. About
John Hurt does an amazing job as
He
Caligula.
was,
He was
Oh,
a great actor.
oh, he was so, he could
He
strut.
was so over the top.
Nobody can portray an alien popping out of their chest like John Hurt.
Mm.
So anyway,
But it was a great
Anyway,
series.
he
we
was
watched-
also Elephant Man, wasn't he? He was John Merrick.
Oh.
and then what was it? No, and did Bowie play him on stage? Was that it or something?
Bowie did play the Elephant Man, and without the makeup,
Right, which I thought was wonderful.
which is pretty tremendous, actually.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Mhm.
So Charles Mazak wants to know if the two of you have ever practiced lucid dreaming.
I tried and tried and tried and tried. I'm not good
As a
at it.
practice, no.
I am not good at
We
it. I
even-
wanted to be able
Yeah.
to do it.
Right.
We even had a book on.
Like
We even
banging my
had
head against the wall.
some tapes, or somebody gave us on Tibetan,
Right.
lucid dreaming, and you kind of adopt the pose of the reclining Buddha, and go into dreams. But
I-
controlling dreams is a tricky path, and I think it could, and for most people, unless you've got a lot of spiritual practice behind you, I don't think it's a good idea. I don't think it's a good idea to go in there and try to control dreams.
Is it controlling dreams? or
Well, it
just
can be,
being
they
aware
like,
in your
I
dreams?
don't know exactly what he's saying, but first you see your hand in a dream, you work your way up to
Mhm, where your
becoming
feet
lucid
are,
in
yeah.
your dreams. But there's something sacred to dreams, which of course Aristotle denied, but I think I like leaving open anyway.
I can tell you, I did try for about a decade for astral projection, and I had tapes that I used to play every night that was supposed to put you into a somnambulant state. I couldn't do that either. I don't know. I don't think I'm destined for any of those esoteric practices. I'm just not allowed in there.
We spent 10 years.
Much as I want, I tried. I was knocking at the door for a decade. I could not astral project to save my life.
I had the astral projection thing without trying to do it.
Some people just do, and yeah,
It
so
was
what
very unnerving.
was it? You couldn't control it.
I mean, you leave your body, and
Yeah.
you're up around the ceiling and doing other shit.
Oh, I've
It's like-
heard. I thought it was sounded really cool. And I wanted to do it.
So
but
it's kind of it's a little terrifying. I mean, I guess if you get over the terror part, I'm not sure I could actually do that. I mean, there are a few times where I was more in control than others. I remember one time, it was probably the one that I had the most control over, and I was sleeping on my couch, and I actually left my body and I went through the bottom of the couch, and I didn't like it down there.
Did you ever read?
fucked up.
What got me all fired up about it was Robert Monroe's book.
Yeah, I read a couple of his
Body.
books. I read a couple of his books.
And then
But
I also there was one that was written around the turn of the century by Sylvan Muldoon was his name. And that was one of those. Of course, it had the flavor of the time, so it was very.
Yeah, you were young then.
I was young.
The Monroe thing was cool. I liked the
couldn't do
Monroe stuff. But then I went from the bottom of the couch back through my body, and then I went through the bay window of my apartment. And that was a trip. Like passing through glass was a thing. I felt it.
Which
So you
reminds
actually
me.
felt
I felt the
substance
glass.
of it.
I felt it was liquid. Like, and then I started to rise in the sky, and I was taken off, and I'm like, man,
Didn't like it.
this
Well,
is
I've had
getting
flying dreams
this is
do
getting
that.
pretty intense.
Mhm.
So I reeled myself back in.
Now that reminds me of Linda Corteil. Did you read that book? It was a Bud Hopkins book about abductions,
No.
and it took place in New York City. And this woman, Linda Corteil, was lifted up, but it was an alien abduction. So she was lifted up out of her bed and passed through the window of her apartment and was floating. And these two police officers witnessed it. And they became absolutely obsessed with the case. And anyway, it's a great book, Bud Hopkins' book. But she was passed right through the glass of her window.
Yes, I know how it feels. Leon Vito Vincent Rodway says it's like learning anything at first. It's kind of scary, but with practice, it becomes fun. I could see that. I could definitely see that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Kate says, I astral projected this past winter and it was pretty cool.
There you go.
There was once in college it happened to me. I just was very tired. I heard a whole bunch of tones and pulled right out. Next thing I knew, I was up on the ceiling of the room.
Sylvan Muldoon's book, he was in a state of exhaustion. And he lay down on the bed in the afternoon, and that was his first experience. That was around 1913 or something.
Yeah, and my only thought was that I was out. I said, "Okay, I'm out. Now, how do you get back in?"
Yeah, you think your way back in.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, absolutely. It's all about intention.
Yeah, you think your way.
Absolutely.
And then there's the silver cord that you can look back and see the silver cord connected to your body.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So they say. Anyway, we are digressing from.
Well, no, but that was good. I mean,
I think
that was really quite good. It's a good way to end. I think that if people, I'm going to try to get Kira Bell on the show. She was the woman who lost her case because they started giving her puberty blockers. I guess he transitioned from a he to a she, and I think I found her Twitter page, and she basically called Tavistock pedos.
I'm shocked, really.
Yeah, I think so. So clearly she's got she's got some skin in the game that is just beyond them mismanaging her biology. Like she's apparently got some other perspective here that we might have a very interesting conversation. I'm going to work on trying to get her on the show.
Good. Yeah,
that could be fascinating.
I mean, Britain is pedocentral.
Unfortunately, it feels that way.
Well, we picked up 2 of Joachim Hagopian's books when Robert David Steele he was selling them off his website. The one I'm in the middle of reading right now is all on the British Crown. It's about this thick, and page after page after page of people in that Royal Buckingham Palace, right down to the chauffeur. It's jaw-dropping. And it's all into Jimmy Savile too, which is another whole, nightmare scenario.
Oh, horrible.
Oh, and he got away with it. He died without being brought to justice.
Right. And so then you have to understand the BBC as an arm of Tavistock.
Right.
Of course.
Right. BBC was way in on it. They knew all about it. That could be a whole show in itself, but not a very happy show.
Yeah. We can let them roll.
Well, do you want to talk about the passing of your friends before we sign off today?
You want to talk about Gene?
Yeah, well, yes. Why
What do
don't
you
you
wanna talk about
start
first?
with Peter London Wilson first?
All right. Well, just, we lost 2 very close people with us within, it was about a week and a half ago now.
Days apart.
Couple of days apart. One of them, I don't know, did you get the email I sent? Probably not.
Probably not.
I can check.
Sent you an email last night with a couple of pictures in it.
Let's bring it up here. Hold on.
So we've published 2 of Peter Lamborn Wilson's book. One just came out about a month ago. And Peter Lamborn Wilson is just somebody I've got to become friends with over the years, and especially with working on his books, but he was ill for a while. And he's sort of like the most influential person for me on my writing anyway, because he was an extracurricular scholar. So he was very interesting. He, went to India early on in the 60s, and then eventually made his way to Persia, and got hooked up with Sayyid Hussein Nasser, who was the head of education under the Shah. And the education under the Shah was excellent. And he was able to study Sufism and he did, translations of Rumi and other Persian Sufi mystic poets who would go out to all these Sufi communities. And then when that fell, I guess eventually came back to New York, and he sort of incorporated anarchism with his Sufism. He's mostly, his big thing that he's known for is the Temporary Autonomous Zone, TAZ, which he wrote under the name of Hakim Bey. So, but just that whole concept of being, I just liked his writing. He's very funny. He's extremely erudite. I have to look up words, and so he's just a real pleasure for me to read. He's written something like 60 books, 60. Translated in 20 languages. And so just he was an important person to me, especially writing, and, and I got to know him. So that's Peter. And a bit of a curmudgeon, and was sick for a number of years. So very pleased. The book that we published, which I assume is not going to be his last book, because I'm sure there are others in the works. One especially called Mercurius.
Is that what Jim Fleming?
But the book we published is called False Messiah. So subtitled Crypto-Christian Tracts and Fragments. So it's a lot of different essays on the False Messiah. So that was a little table I put together of the books that we have.
And there's False Messiah on the middle right.
Right. Peacock Angel is his book about the Yazidis. We did a show about the Yazidis. So that finally came out. The other one, my favorite, Utopian Trace, middle left, right above that, Sacred Drift, maybe my favorite of his books. And the one book of short stories to the bottom right called Night Market Noodles and Other Tales is one of my favorite books of short stories, period. Very impressed with that. And then the other one right above it is called Irish Soma. And that's about an Irish Soma mushroom cult, looking at the Irish tales and the Vedic tales, and finding evidence for a cult of Irish Soma, and looking at the mythology in terms of like the sacred berry that's always talked about, or the sacred trout,
and the salmon
being
the sacred salmon.
Right, the sacred salmon being the fount of bardic wisdom.
So the holy wells in Ireland are seen as portals to the other world. And this, the salmon would be in there, and then the berry would fall in, and the salmon would eat the berry.
Right. So
it was like a Soma ritual.
So he combines, sort of like what I try to do, combining mythology, contemporary politics, in a unique way. So that's Peter.
Did you ever ask him about how he felt about Taz in Seattle? Did you ever ask him that?
No, I didn't.
Oh, huh.
No, I didn't.
Well, that would have been a good question.
Because that's kind of a weird part of his legacy, right? Like,
right.
They set up this temporary autonomous zone in Seattle, which becomes this like bizarre chapter in the whole George Floyd.
Yeah.
Summer of George Floyd.
Yeah, it was like a subtext. Yeah.
I didn't. Plus, because when I know when he's anti-violent, he's not into
like
violence.
Occupy Wall Street too.
He's not into violence, and the temporary autonomous zone is more like, at least the way I remember reading it, it's more like a way to wall yourself off from the oppressive system. So a dinner party. Or something like that. I think he tried doing a couple of.
Seemed like it was for the arts, and
yeah, he had did things a couple of times in Central Park,
like a cauldron for creativity, I would say, where you would get together with friends and have live conversation rather than canned conversation. This is our teacher Gene.
So and it's funny, it's funny how we don't talk about it much. What have we done? Like 50 shows with you, Robert?
Yeah.
We spent 10 years in a traditional yoga center on Long Island. It wasn't a live-in center, but you might as well have been. So we spent 10 years, practicing a couple hours a day, and that's our spiritual foundation. So our teacher there was named Gene Kelly. At the time, he went under the name of Yogi Anand Viraj. And he was just absolutely brilliant on a number of levels. One, he just made all these complex Indian systems, philosophies. Just when he spoke them, they were crystal clear.
They would come alive.
I couldn't at the time anyway. I couldn't repeat them and do anything expository about them. But he would just make them really clear. And the other thing he had a real blowout, samadhi experience
very early
on in like his early 20s. And then he really started studying the systems, but he went through hell to work it out through his life. And really it was only when we kind of got back together with him, it was about sometimes 7 years ago. And we just started having these long conversations with him. And, that he worked it through and just became this just beautiful, mellow
it was like
person.
Burnished gold.
And so it was our real pleasure. So that's how we started the our Good Crack channel, was we would have long conversations with him. You want to jump in?
Sure. Well, we would have phone conversations with him. He was living in Roanoke at the time. And they were always so delicious that you never wanted to stop. And we would just roll from one
hours.
Philosophical thing to the next. And he was totally plugged in to what's happening in the world. He was not Pollyanna by any stretch of the imagination. He would look at the cold, hard facts and he could see right through it like it was a pure crystal glass. And so I started thinking, wow, these conversations are so good. We should just record them. And so Steve came up with the name Good Crack. And that's when we started doing the YouTube channel with him. And so we got in 8 before
shows,
before he got too sick to continue.
And then he was too sick and we haven't done one in 10 months. So we're going to continue
but they're there if anyone wants to go. It's CRAIC, Crack, Good Crack.
Maury's a big fan.
Maury and
Dawn. A number of people in the chat room signed up for it.
Yeah.
So that's really nice. And so, we were kind of waiting and he just never, always hoping he was well enough to do another show. Never did. We're going to continue it in some form. I don't know how yet.
We're going to do something with it. So I don't know how, but the spirit of it is that it's delicious conversation and it's meaningful conversation and it's current and relevant.
And hopefully like what we're doing here, hopefully that's
something like
enjoyable
this
for people.
We'll see.
So, and the thing that I really learned from him is examining your presuppositions.
That was a big,
that was a big thing. Examining the language you're speaking. What is behind that language that you're speaking, and that we will go through. And he was ruthless with that.
He was
to the point. Like I think our last show, I got actually really pissed at him.
You would mark every word you said because you knew it was open for scrutiny. And well, what do you mean by that, Chris? It's like, well, then you have to think, well, where am I coming from? Why am I saying that? What are my presuppositions? Anyway, he was.
That's very powerful. It's a powerful.
It is very powerful.
He's an amazing teacher.
He was just astonishing.
And the other thing I'd like to say about him is that when he actually gave a meditation, because after things broke up in the ashram for him, and then soon after for us, things kind of just didn't work anymore for us there. We had a really nice spot. My parents had a house in Massapequa right on the Great South Bay, and we would have a porch above it. And then we had, small classes and we taped them, and we would, but when he led a meditation, he could carry you. And I've never come across anybody that could do that like that. So, so it's a big hole for us in our lives. And we were saying, Chris was just saying this morning,
I feel different.
I feel very
since
different.
Jean died. I feel different. And
well,
I think it's what I'm feeling is what you expressed, is that right after he died, you realize that now we need to step up to the plate because there's no buffer for us anymore. It's like, tag, you're it. Now you're up. Now here's the ball's been passed to you. What are you going to do with it? So
right.
That's it. Yeah, we're up. So So yeah, it's because that light is gone. We have to try to bring in something, to carry on to whatever's next.
I think you should do a series of videos called "Smoking with Maury."
Well, yeah, Maury,
Okay.
Maury and Dawn show up.
Maury.
We have the smoking corner in
Maury
our.
is tuned in.
Maury is pretty
Tuned
wise. Maury's pretty wise.
Now, what
I
Gene
agree.
would say, he
Yeah.
used a phrase that was very precise, and he said, he would say, Maury has it natively.
Has it natively. Yeah. I would say that's true.
He has it natively, and some people have that. I
Yeah.
see that in my niece Diana. She has it natively.
Right.
Some people come in with that knowing, that wisdom, and then they need to work on it. It's not just like here, one and done.
Polish.
You have to
Right.
work on it and
Burnish.
be put through some trials and tribulations,
Right.
but you have something to work with anyway.
Yeah. I think Jasper's that way too.
I think so.
Jasper's definitely, and and Chengiz is another Sufi cat.
Yeah.
So I came home this morning and I don't know what happened, but I have you haven't been to the new place, but I have two doors to get it in and out. Like one in the front faces the highway, and then the other on the side that is kind of the laundry room door. And I came home today because I wasn't here last night. I came home, I walk in, and the damn laundry room door is open. I'm not sure. It's like, how did that get open? And the evil cat was inside the house.
Oh.
And I was like, what the fuck are you doing in here? And he saw me, he ran. Whenever he sees me now, he runs. Because I shot him in the well, I was like, what is going on with you, Jasper? Can't you defend your territory here?
Don't you expel him?
A little bit. So
Well,
yeah.
thank you for letting us say something about our friend.
Of course. We'll put a link up, of course, to your website, Logosophia Books, where you can find Peter's work, and then we'll put a link up for the good crack videos. So
Thank you.
Yeah, that's nice. Yeah. I think there's a lot there. Gene's incredible, and he's just radical.
Well, it sounds like it's a great loss on both sides. So,
It's a hit.
Yeah.
And happened pretty close together, right? They're both left.
And close to
It was a
Steve's
couple of
birthday.
days. Yeah.
Steve's birthday was just before that.
Wow.
Right.
So you're
Right. It's like
So
the same. There's like a
it's like-
three
it's
within
like-
the week.
bang bang. Wow.
Yeah.
A lot of people leaving the realm now.
Yes.
Well, that's the scary part, right?
Yes.
There's something they see there's some part of them see
You're
what's
not
coming.
leaving us here,
Yeah,
are
we're
you?
still here.
Don't leave us here.
So,
Yeah.
yep. Now I'm 64. Back to Paul McCartney and the Beatles.
Right. Which brings us back to the beginning of the show in Tavistock. So I think it's a
All right.
good place
All
to
right.
end.
Thank you,
Yeah.
Robert.
Robert, great show. Enjoy talking to you.
Thank you, chat room.
You're welcome. And I guess we'll see you guys in a few weeks.
Okay.
We got some great guests coming up. Do you know Christopher Knowles, The Secret Son? Do you know him?
I know the name,
That
but not
sounds familiar.
much.
He's got a great blog. He's been doing it for a long time. He's going to be on the show on July 8th. So
Okay.
that's what are we, about a month away now?
What is real quick? What's his topic? What is The Secret Son about?
So Christopher Knowles does a lot of decoding and a lot of symbolic work. And I think originally he started with things like comic books and looking at like the, symbolic subtext of comics, but he's moved on to a lot of different things. And so he's going to be on the show on July 8th. That's going to be really, really good.
So that-
Good.
yeah.
Look forward to
It's
that.
all right. So yeah. So I guess our next one will be July 1st. Then.
I think it's the second. I think it's the first. It's right. It's Friday. And then this young guy named Mark, who has been a client of mine. I'm going to try and get him on maybe with Russ Winter at the end of the month.
I really like Russ Winters.
Russ is great. Russ
Yeah.
is, his father was Tex Winter. You know that, right?
I don't know who that is.
Steve knows who Tex Winter is.
I don't know much. You got to remind me. now.
Tex Winter is the architect of the triangle offense in basketball.
Oh, right.
That's
Okay.
why I don't know him.
No, Chris talks to me about basketball every night. It's very sweet.
So
Tell you the
Te-
story about basketball.
So there would be no Chicago Bulls without Tex Winter.
And the Knicks would have won a championship during that period.
And then Phil Jackson leaves, goes to LA, and he takes Tex with him. So he created one of the great offenses in basketball history.
Yeah, they went 5 in a row, something like that, or 5 out of 6.
I think they won 5 out of 6, and then I think the Lakers got 3. I think Phil's got 8 rings. So I got 3.
Yeah.
I think he got 3 with the Lakers and 5.
And he
5
came
with
to the
Bulls.
Knicks, and they totally imploded.
He was the general manager, and God, I don't know. It's the curse of Jimmy Dolan, and nobody can really.
Yeah, the only thing we can do is get rid of him. The Knicks, Knicks are my basketball team growing up. I mean, when I first started getting interested in sports, the Jets, the Knicks, and the Mets all won, the same year, and I just thought it was my birthright,
Oh, sure.
to have.
Like it was always going to just happen like that every year, right?
Right. It just seemed, so that's what's supposed to
Yeah,
happen.
that's right. That's right. It was all New York that year. Yeah, I
But you
remember.
remember our first introduction to Russ Winter was through Gene. Our teacher, Gene, was the first one. And it was a story that he did on Pete Buttigieg.
So you got connected to Russ through Gene?
Yep.
Yeah.
Oh, that's interesting.
Because he's like, you got to listen to read this guy. He's great. His essays are great.
Yeah. So I'm gonna try to get this young guy Mark on the show that day. And Mark was a client of mine whom I'd met through his wife, who'd been a client of mine. And now all of a sudden Mark is like totally blowing up. He's been on Alex Jones. He was on Stu Peters.
Wow.
So he basically, what he did is he took all the Agenda 21, 2030 stuff, and then he looked at what was happening locally and was able to connect all these dots and go from community to community and find out how this stuff was getting rolled out on a local level. So I think he wrote a paper on it or did some kind of a PDF, and it got picked up. And so now it's kind of a big deal. And he's got people want to form an organization around him.
Oh,
so it's a very interesting story because he came over from England and he had been in some kind of a metal band in England. And I actually got to know him through his wife when his wife was talking about him and wanted, hey, what do you think of this guy? Can you look at his chart? Right. I'm like, well, it looks pretty good. Why not? It's like you can do something. And then she went to go meet him, I think in Minneapolis. And then not long after they got married, they got 3 kids now.
Oh, isn't that nice?
Yeah. And he's kind of a rising star, I guess, in the American Patriot movement. I guess you'd call it that.
And what is his name?
His name is Mark. I forget his, I want to say Davis. It's not Davis though. He's going to kill me because I'm butchering his last name. But we'll get him. I think I'll try to get him on.
That sounds great.
The week that I have Russ on, and bring him on towards the end of the show. That would be good.
Good. And don't forget Miriam Hanine. Her story is just really amazing.
Is that walking
George,
with Alethea?
No, it's George Floyd.
She actually, she hung out with Beverly, and Beverly sent me a picture of the two of them together.
Really?
Yeah.
Beverly?
Yeah.
Beverly.
Really?
And she's good friends with
Beverly know her?
with Danny also, Danny Katz.
Yeah,
Danny
she's
Katz.
close with Danny.
Okay, so I got to get her on the show. That'd be good.
Yeah, that'd be great. It would mean a lot to her.
How is the Walking with Alethea sales going?
Go
go ahead. I'm just thinking about the book. Reading.
The book reading we had last
terrible.
Saturday in the area did not go over very well, but we did tape it, and it's up on our we have it's on our Vimeo page, and it's also on the Logo Sophia.
Oh, so why didn't it go well? Was it poorly attended? Was
very
it
poorly attended.
Yeah, there's only one. Yeah.
Go ahead.
One person who drove 4 hours though to meet her. Well, it's kind of it's a story that I don't want to get into too much, but the local bookstore, which was a great independent bookstore,
they said no. They said no.
They said no. They blew me
off.
I've given 3 readings there. Logos of the authors have given 4 authors we've had there. But 2 years ago, the woman who founded it sold it, and now if you look at the suggested readings, it's all CRT. So if Jean had written a book, how CRT, helped me overcome child abuse, she would have been ushered in. But those are not the people there anymore.
They just completely.
It's nothing to do with
threw us
literature
off.
anymore, with love of literature. It's all fucking agenda. There, I got a curse in, at least one curse.
Yeah. So we went to this kind of an outlier town. It's called Silva, and it's a very charming mountain village and blah, blah, blah. But they have a really nice bookstore there, but only one person showed up. But that person drove 4 hours and was totally on fire to meet Jean. And I recorded it, and the recording came out really good.
You never know how that one person will, or what that one person will do with the material too.
Right.
And they needed it. This
She
person
really
needed it.
needed it.
So it was great. Jean was fine. She,
She's like,
her brother was fine, and it was great. And that's how we hadn't met them personally before either. So that worked out well. So, so the book is doing okay. I mean, we had a big pre-sale.
Right.
But now it's kind of working its way through all the sort of, therapists. And so it seems to have like, a little bit of a steady thing, but it's not coming from our website. It's, it's a lot of Amazon.
But long story
sales.
short, for people who don't know, the name of the book is Walking with Alethea, and it's Jean Hargadon Wayner. And her story is that when she was in high school in the 70s, she was ritually abused and, sequentially abused by the chaplain of the school and the police officers and the judges and, the politicians. And it was a ring.
Wow.
And there was a Netflix series done on that story because her teacher, Sister Kathy Sesnick, was murdered because she found out what was going on and she confronted the priest, and then he murdered her and then tried to blame Jean, the student, tried to make her think that she had done it. But there were 40 girls in that school who came forward as adults and said, I was also abused by that priest. And so Netflix did this story, and it was supposed to be just one episode, but it was so compelling, and it's still an open case. It's an unsolved murder. So it was their all-time, high numbers documentary for Netflix. So Jean has this incredible following because there were 2 Facebook groups who grew out of that tragedy, and those people spread the word. So that's how the book had this initial, explosive sales, but now it's quieted down. But the story is just absolutely stunning. And the name of the series on Netflix is called The Keepers. And it's so well done. Jean shows up in the 2nd episode and she's in for the rest of the whole season. But an amazing story. Absolutely.
But buy the book because it's about her recovery.
It's all about her recovery.
You got to get her on George Norrie.
On George Norrie?
We'll see. She's been on, she's from Baltimore. She's been on, TV in Baltimore, and, so she's been around. I don't know. George Norrie might be an interesting one. I don't know.
Why George Norrie?
Well, first of all, it's got a huge audience. Second of all, it's got elements of conspiracy, right? Because there's a conspiracy in there, right? A conspiracy of silence. And then there's a recovery component to it.
I'll talk to her publicist.
And you recover from trauma and these, horrible things that have happened in the past. So I think it'd be a fit. They're always looking for authors, and he actually is much more amenable to somebody who's actually written a book than somebody. So I think it'd be a
review copy. Good idea.
I think it'd be a good fit.
Good. Thanks for the tip.
I'll send him a review copy. I'll find out how it goes.
Okay.
I actually know somebody who might be able to help you with that.
Okay.
Oh, good. Okay.
All right. We'll talk.
Yeah.
Okay. We should release our audience. They're like, when is
Release the Kraken.
When is this going to end?
Guys, you may go about your day.
3 minutes. All right. Thanks, guys. Love you both.
You're welcome.
Take good care.
Thanks, Robert.
Have a great weekend.
Soon.
And
Come
we'll
in.
talk soon. Yeah.
Okay.
And I'll send you that email. Okay.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
All right. Take
So
care.
long. Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
All All right, that was the Crimis with another wonderful show. And we'll have links if you're interested in getting a copy of Walking with Alethea, which is the book that we were speaking of. And, of course, their website, Logosophia Books. I'll be back on Sunday night with Sunday Night Astro Live. We've got 2+ hours of astrology that we delve into. And, yeah, it'll be good. 6 p.m. Central Daylight Time here in the hill country of Texas. You know the drill. Use your head in order to discern what's real, your heart to step on what's possible. I'm Robert Phoenix. Take good care, and we'll see you on Sunday. Have a good